Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, we will discover why ancient Egyptian tombs were death traps. Pull up a digital sarcophagus, dim the lights, and try to relax. We're about to embark on a journey that will either lull you into a profound existential slumber or send shivers down your spine so potent you'll rethink every dusty antique in your attic. We're diving, head first and probably ill-advisedly, into the ancient Egyptian tomb. Not just a final resting place, you understand, but a monument to paranoia, a masterclass in passive-aggressive post-mortem property defense. And yes, it's going to be long. You've been warned. Consider this your historical Ambien, but with significantly more ancient curses and falling granite. The air here is already thick with the scent of millennia-old dust, tinged with the faint, unsettling aroma of preserved organic matter and the distinct metallic tang of historical irony. You can almost feel the oppressive weight of forgotten empires pressing down on you, a gentle but insistent reminder that even in death, some people just can't let go. We're not here for a quick tour. This is an immersion, a deep plunge into the depths of human ingenuity pitted against human greed. A battle fought across thousands of years with chisels, curses, and catastrophic engineering. So, settle in. We have a lot of dead kings and their very expensive possessions to discuss. This isn't just a video. It's an archaeological seance where the spirits of frustrated pharaohs and eternally annoyed tomb robbers will be your constant spectral companions. Try not to let them whisper too many existential dreads into your subconscious. Forget your humble plots, your tasteful urns, your quiet contemplation of the hereafter. The ancient Egyptians, bless their eternally optimistic and deeply materialistic hearts, envisioned death not as an ending, but as a particularly long-haul flight to a far more fabulous destination. And just like any modern-day influencer preparing for a tropical getaway, they weren't about to show up empty-handed. Their tombs, then, were not merely graves. Oh no. They were increasingly elaborate, often fatal, high-security storage units. Picture a fusion of a self-storage facility, a bank vault, and a haunted house, all meticulously designed to protect the deceased's eternal treasures from the grimy, opportunistic clutches of, well, you. Or, at least, someone very much like you, but with a lot more dirt under their fingernails and a severe lack of personal boundaries. This wasn't some quaint tradition. It was a cornerstone of their theology, their economy, and their entire worldview. To deny a pharaoh their necessary goods for the afterlife was to jeopardize not just their individual journey, but potentially the very stability of the cosmos. The pharaoh was a god on earth, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. His continued prosperity in the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, was vital for the sun to rise, for the Nile to flood, for barley to grow. So protecting his afterlife property wasn't just about keeping his golden bling safe. It was a matter of national security, a cosmic imperative. The stakes, you see, were astronomically high. And where stakes are high, paranoia thrives. And where paranoia thrives, you get incredibly creative, sometimes hilariously over the top, death traps. Think less home security system and more nuclear launch codes for the eternal soul. It was serious business, often with very unserious outcomes for those who dared to intrude. So we're not just talking about a hole in the ground here. We're talking about millennia of increasingly desperate and often comically over-engineered attempts to keep sticky fingers off sacred bling. From the earliest mud brick shanties of the dead to the towering, sun-kissed geometric perfection of the pyramids, and later, the subterranean spelunking adventures of the Valley of the Kings, the Egyptians were locked in an eternal, losing battle against human avarice. This is a deep dive into the human psyche, specifically the part that thinks, I can totally take this with me, and the equally strong part that thinks, oh, hell no, you won't. It's a testament to ingenuity, stubbornness, and an almost pathological inability to let go of material possessions even after ceasing to possess a pulse. We will ponder, at length, the various iterations of this macabre arms race, the triumphs, the glorious failures, and the sheer, exhausting effort involved. Imagine the pitch meeting. Your Majesty, we've designed a system so complex, so filled with granite and misdirection, that only the most dedicated and, frankly, unhinged individual would ever bother. The pharaoh, undoubtedly, would rub his chin, perhaps stroking a perfectly manicured false beard, and reply, "Excellent. But can we make it more annoying? I want them to weep tears of pure frustration before they even find the antechamber." This wasn't just about deterrence. It was about psychological torment, a posthumous prank on a grand scale. And we will explore every single, meticulously designed, often failed detail of that torment. From the precise angles of descending passages to the estimated man-hours required to chisel through a fake wall, we'll leave no stone unturned, no booby-trap unanalyzed, no ancient curse unsarcastically commented upon. Get comfortable. This is going to be a while. Prepare yourselves, then, for a journey through the hilarious, yet existentially dread-inducing exposé of ancient Egyptian interior design and booby-trapping. We'll laugh at the hubris, we'll marvel at the sheer scale, and we'll probably feel a slight, unsettling claustrophobia just imagining ourselves in those dark, dust-choked passages. This isn't your dry, textbook history. This is history with a smirk, a raised eyebrow, and the lingering scent of millennia-old grave dust, and, perhaps, a hint of desperation. We're going to treat these magnificent monuments of death with the respect they deserve, which is to say, we're going to pick them apart, mock their flaws, and marvel at their audacious ingenuity, all while trying not to cough up a lung from the sheer volume of historical irony. Think of it as a black comedy documentary where the punchline is often human futility and the setting is a millennia-old crypt. We'll blend accurate historical details, the very real architectural marvels, the actual historical records of tomb robberies, the genuine beliefs of the ancient Egyptians, with humorous exaggerations. Because, let's be honest, the idea of a god-king spending the equivalent of a national budget on a super-secure eternal storage locker, only for some dude with a bronze chisel to crack it open in a few weeks, is inherently hilarious. It's an absurd, grand, and ultimately very human story. So, brace yourself for vivid imagery that makes you feel the grit between your teeth, the chill of subterranean air, and the quiet despair of a thief realizing he's just spent 3 days tunneling into a pile of dirt. Your senses, I promise you, will be thoroughly, if morbidly, engaged. Now, you might be wondering, why boring history for sleep with a dark, funny, sarcastic tone? Ah, my friend, that's where the genius lies. Because the endless, meticulously detailed chronicle of human greed and post-mortem property defense is inherently soporific, despite its macabre humor. The sheer scale of the effort, the relentless repetition of certain strategies, the almost predictable dance between builder and robber, it all compounds into a hypnotic drone of historical inevitability. We'll delve into the specific dimensions of passages, the weight of stone blocks, the precise angle of a pyramid, the philosophical underpinnings of why one would even bother with such theatrics. It's a beautiful, morbid lullaby, a symphony of human folly played out over thousands of years. So, close your eyes, if you dare, but remember, the Pharaohs are always watching, and they're definitely judging your sleep posture. Don't let the thought of 1,000 tons of granite resting above you keep you awake. The very act of detailing these intricate plans, these centuries of architectural arms races, these repetitive acts of sealing and unsealing, all contributes to a rhythmic, almost hypnotic narrative. It's the kind of history that, while fascinating, can also gently guide you towards the land of Nod, perhaps to dream of ancient curses or the disconcerting creak of a granite portcullis. We'll delve into the esoteric names of passages, the precise cubic meterage of displaced stone, the subtle shifts in design philosophy from one dynasty to the next. This isn't just about entertainment. It's about providing a deeply atmospheric, richly detailed soundscape for your subconscious. Let the whispers of long-dead kings and the echoes of ancient chisels be your guide to a truly unique slumber. Just remember, if you wake up covered in sand, don't blame us. It's probably just a side effect of prolonged exposure to historical irony. All right, let's get down to brass tacks. Why all the fuss? Why devote an entire civilization's GDP to securing the eternal repose of its leaders? It all boils down to one simple, profoundly optimistic, and utterly delusional belief. Death is just a very long commute. Seriously. For the ancient Egyptians, kicking the bucket wasn't the final curtain call. It was more like getting ready for an extended vacation in a parallel dimension, specifically the Duat, their underworld. And just like you wouldn't show up for a flight to Tahiti without your passport, luggage, and a healthy dose of SPF 50, you certainly couldn't transition to the afterlife without your essentials. No, scratch that. You couldn't transition without your entire life's possessions, plus a few extra things you probably didn't even need when you were alive. The idea was that your earthly existence, your ka and ba, your soul components essentially, needed a familiar, comfortable setting to reside in. This wasn't some ethereal spiritual journey. It was a physical relocation. And for a physical relocation, you needed stuff. Lots and lots of stuff. Imagine their concept of the afterlife not as some abstract spiritual plane, but as a direct continuation of earthly life, only without the pesky annoyances like taxes or bad breath. Your ka, your vital essence or life force, needed a place to reside comfortably, to receive offerings, and to relive the joys of life. Your ba, a more mobile aspect of your soul, could travel between the tomb and the spirit world, but it still needed a physical anchor, a familiar environment. So your tomb became your eternal home, your permanent address in the cosmos. And what kind of home would it be without all your favorite things? It would be a spiritual dump. Unthinkable. The pharaoh, being a divine king, a living god, needed an afterlife commensurate with his earthly status. This wasn't vanity, it was cosmic necessity. He couldn't just float off into the ether. He needed his golden throne, his canopic jars, his shabtis, little servant figures to do his manual labor, and a truly impressive amount of jewelry. It was less about going to heaven and more about relocating your entire palace, staff included, to a new dimension. And as anyone who's ever moved house knows, that requires a lot of boxes. So what made the cut for this eternal packing list? Oh, everything. You weren't just going to arrive in the afterlife with the shirt on your back. That would be uncivilized. You needed furniture for lounging in your afterlife palace. You needed tools, in case you had to do some spiritual DIY. You needed chariots for cruising the celestial highways. You needed cosmetics, because even in the duat, a pharaoh had to look fabulous. And naturally, you needed food and drink in vast quantities for an eternal feast, often magically provided by spells, but also physically present in the form of dried provisions. But most importantly, crucially, undeniably, you needed gold. Loads of it. Because what's the point of eternal happiness if you can't accessorize with solid gold? Gold represented divinity, the flesh of the gods, eternal and incorruptible. So if you were an Egyptian dignitary, your afterlife shopping list looked less like a Costco run and more like a heist inventory from a particularly ambitious Hollywood movie. Imagine the chaos of trying to pack all that for your heavenly departure. It wasn't just a shopping list. It was an existential inventory. We're talking about entire wardrobes of fine linen, meticulously carved wooden chests, papyrus scrolls filled with ancient wisdom, and probably a few spiritual memes, board games for eternal entertainment, and even weaponry, just in case the underworld had a particularly rowdy neighborhood. And the food: dried fish, dates, loaves of bread, jars of wine and beer, all carefully placed to sustain the Ka through eternity. It's like preparing for an apocalypse, only you're the one who's already died. And the gold, oh, the gold. Scarab beetles carved from glittering yellow metal, intricate necklaces, solid gold masks, gilded sarcophagi. Gold was literally seen as the skin of the gods, immutable and eternal. So it wasn't just valuable, it was sacred. And therefore, absolutely essential for the pharaoh's divine journey. It was the ultimate flex, a material demonstration of divinity and power that even death couldn't diminish. And it also happened to be incredibly tempting for anyone still stuck in the mortal coil. Now, this is where the real headache started. You've assembled your eternal trousseau, your post-mortem starter pack, your divine survival kit. How do you transport all this wealth to the next world? Simple. You bury it with the deceased. But then, a far more pressing, profoundly human problem arises. How do you keep it safe from, well, everyone still in this world? Because, let's be honest, people are greedy. And people, even ancient people, are acutely aware of where the rich dead people are burying their stuff. So the moment you commit these unimaginable riches to the earth, you've basically put a giant flashing neon sign over it that screams, "Free stuff! Come and get it!" It's a logistical nightmare, an ethical conundrum, and a supreme test of ancient engineering, all wrapped up in a shroud of grave goods. The pharaohs were essentially challenging humanity's inherent kleptomania. Spoiler alert, humanity won, repeatedly. Imagine the procession itself, an elaborate, slow, solemn march to the burial site. Everyone present sees the enormous quantity of wealth being interred. The workers who built the tomb, the priests who performed the rituals, the guards, the servants. Everyone is privy to the secret location of untold riches. It's a massive security breach built into the very design of the funeral. You're effectively building a giant underground bank vault and then inviting everyone who works for you, plus their extended families, to see exactly where the vault is, what's inside, and how it's sealed. What could possibly go wrong? It's like announcing on social media that you're going on a long vacation and leaving your front door unlocked, with a sign that says, "All my valuable stuff is inside." The temptation for people living in a world of subsistence agriculture and often desperate poverty would be overwhelming. The logistical nightmare wasn't just about getting the stuff in, it was about keeping the living out once the dead were settled. And this, my friends, is the original sin, the fatal flaw in the entire grand scheme. If you, the esteemed pharaoh, believe you can take it with you, all your gold, your furniture, your priceless ankhs, your meticulously mummified pets, then someone else, usually a highly motivated local with a chisel and a distinct lack of scruples, believes they can take it from you. Thus began the arms race. It was a centuries-long, deeply frustrating battle between the deceased's eternal security and the living's insatiable, utterly temporal greed. Every single innovation in tomb construction, every new layer of stone, every cleverly disguised passage, every menacing inscription was a direct response to a previous act of pilfering. It was an ancient game of cat and mouse, only the mouse usually won, and the cat was a mummified corpse with an increasingly elaborate, utterly useless security system. So the insecure birth of tomb architecture wasn't about respecting the dead, it was about protecting their stuff from the very much alive. This wasn't a gentle evolution, it was a frantic, reactive scramble. Each time a tomb was breached, a new fix was devised. They tunneled through the mud brick? All right, let's try solid stone. They found the passage? Okay, let's put in a giant granite block. They dug around the block? Fine, we'll make the passages crooked and add a pit. It was a constant cycle of escalation, driven by a fear so profound it transcended death itself. The pharaohs were effectively engaged in a cold war against future generations, a desperate attempt to protect their eternal retirement fund from anyone who felt their earthly poverty justified a little posthumous redistribution of wealth. And the ultimate irony, despite all the unparalleled ingenuity, the immense resources, and the sheer scale of their efforts, they almost always lost. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit of larceny. All right, rewind the sands of time back to the early dynastic period, roughly 3100 to 2686 BCE. We're talking about the very nascent stages of what would become a millennia-long obsession with death and real estate. This is when the first pharaohs, these newly unified rulers of Upper and Lower Egypt, started accumulating enough personal wealth to create a luxury problem for themselves: how to bury all their fabulous riches without immediately inviting every ne'er-do-well in the Nile Valley to a posthumous yard sale. These early rulers, while powerful, hadn't quite perfected the art of the impenetrable tomb. They were more like the Silicon Valley startups of the afterlife industry. Big ideas, lots of capital, but still figuring out the actual product. The first tombs were statements of burgeoning power, yes, but also incredibly tempting targets for anyone with a shovel and a strong moral flexibility. Life in early dynastic Egypt was, for most, a grueling struggle for survival. Droughts, famines, and disease were constant companions. So, when the ruling elite started showing off their immense wealth by burying it with their dead, it was a flashing neon sign for anyone desperate enough to take a risk. The disparity between the opulence destined for the afterlife and the harsh realities of daily life for the living created an irresistible temptation. It wasn't just gold and jewels. It was copper tools, valuable pottery, fine linen, and grain, essentials that could mean the difference between life and death for a family struggling on the banks of the Nile. So, while the pharaohs were busy establishing their divine right to rule and their eternal legacy, they were simultaneously, and rather inadvertently, creating the ancient world's most lucrative and hazardous job market, tomb robbery. The luxury of the dead became the necessity of the living, and the cycle of crime and punishment was set in motion. So, what did these early pharaohs get for their eternal rest? They got a mastaba. Now, don't let the fancy name fool you. A mastaba, from the Arabic word for stone bench, was quite literally a rectangular, flat-topped, mud brick structure with sloping sides built over a burial shaft. Imagine a very large, very squat, very dusty brick building that looks less like a royal tomb and more like a particularly robust garden shed, if garden sheds were for dead kings. They were elegant in their simplicity, certainly, a stark contrast to the later, more flamboyant architectural statements. But from a security standpoint, laughably easy to crack for any determined looter. You could practically hear the ancient equivalent of a "for sale" sign flapping in the desert wind. They were, in essence, the starter homes of the afterlife, destined to be outgrown and outlooted rather quickly. These mastabas often contained multiple chambers and shafts, sometimes for family members, sometimes for servants or retainers who were occasionally sacrificed to accompany the king. The main burial chamber, however, was usually subterranean, accessed by a vertical shaft and then a short passage leading to the chamber itself. The superstructure above ground, the visible mud brick bench, often had two false doors, inscribed with the name of the deceased and containing offering tables. These false doors were meant for the ka to exit and re-enter, to receive offerings from the living. They weren't intended as actual entry points for humans, but they did provide a highly convenient, very visible landmark for anyone with malicious intent. See that big mud brick bench? Yeah, the one with the fake doors? The good stuff is probably right under that. It was less a security system and more a polite suggestion that valuables may be found within. What was the sophisticated security system for these mud brick marvels? Brace yourselves. It involved thick walls and burying the burial chamber relatively deep. Revolutionary, I know. The theory was, if you put enough mud brick between the goodies and the greedy, they'd just give up. And if you dug the actual burial chamber, where the mummified king and all his glorious trinkets rested, a few meters underground, surely that would deter the riffraff. They would then fill the shaft with rubble, hoping to obscure its entrance. It was the architectural equivalent of putting a "Beware of Dog" sign on an unlocked front door. The intentions were good, the execution less so. The builders probably stood back, wiped the sweat from their brows, and thought, "There, no one will ever find that. Oh, you sweet, naive souls." Spoiler alert, in case you hadn't guessed, not deep enough. Never deep enough. The process involved digging a shaft, lowering the coffin and grave goods, and then backfilling the shaft with a mixture of sand, gravel, and sometimes mud bricks. The idea was to make it look like untouched ground. Simple, elegant, and entirely insufficient. Mud brick, while readily available, is not exactly a Fort Knox-level defense. It's soft, easily dug through, and prone to erosion. The deep burial chamber was relative. A few meters down was deep enough to protect from casual interference, but not from a determined individual with a copper tool and a few nights of quiet digging. And the rubble filling? That was just extra material for the robbers to clear. It's like trying to protect your house with a picket fence and a slightly deeper basement. You might deter a particularly lazy squirrel, but not anyone with actual intent. The early Egyptians were clearly optimists, or perhaps just hadn't encountered the full spectrum of human depravity yet. So, who were these pioneering criminals, these original sin-eaters of ancient Egyptian history? While we don't have their names etched in infamy, they were, after all, trying to be discreet, we can make some highly sarcastic, yet probably accurate speculations. It was probably the guys who built it. Think about it. They knew exactly where the goodies were, where the weak points in the mud brick structure lay, and exactly how many heavy stone blocks had been used to seal the shaft. Or perhaps it was their disgruntled cousins who, after a long day of back-breaking labor, realized they were never going to get rich honestly. Maybe it was the local shepherd who noticed a new mound of bricks appear overnight and thought, that seems suspiciously valuable. The ancient Egyptians, like humans throughout history, were both ingenious builders and astonishingly good at breaking into things that other people built. The first wave of tomb robbers weren't master criminals. They were opportunists, driven by hunger, poverty, or just a healthy dose of ancient Egyptian YOLO. And thus, the eternal dance began, a tango between the dead and the desperate, played out under the unforgiving desert sun. It's often hypothesized that the first tomb robbers were not random outsiders, but rather members of the burial party or those closely associated with the construction. They had inside knowledge. They knew the layout. They knew the precise location of the valuables. Why would you build something incredibly valuable only to leave it to chance? Furthermore, the early periods of Egyptian history were not always as stable as later eras. During periods of famine, economic hardship, or political upheaval, the temptation to breach these visible repositories of wealth would have been immense. A group of disgruntled workers, a starving family, a corrupt local official, the motives were as varied as they were compelling. The ingenuity of the builders was almost immediately matched by the ingenuity of the breakers, setting the stage for the millennia-long architectural arms race that would follow. The pharaohs laid the groundwork for their own plundering, and the first wave of robbers merely picked up the shovel and started digging. All right, buckle up because we're about to meet the OG of ancient Egyptian architectural overkill, Imhotep. This guy wasn't just an architect, he was a vizier, a high priest, a physician, and basically the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a Renaissance man, but with considerably more linen and fewer frescoes. Serving Pharaoh Djoser during the Third Dynasty, around 2670 BCE, Imhotep looked at those humble, easily breached mud brick mastabas and thought, you know what? This is entirely too subtle. We need something grander. Something that screams, don't even think about it, in massive stone hieroglyphs. He was the first one to truly grasp the potential for architectural intimidation, to understand that if you build something ridiculously enormous and confusing, you might just get people to back off. Imhotep wasn't just designing a tomb. He was designing a statement, a very, very tall, very, very heavy, and very, very hard to break into statement. He basically invented the concept of escalation in tomb security. Imhotep wasn't just a builder, he was a visionary. He was probably the kind of guy who, when asked for a simple garden shed, would design a multi-story, fortified skyscraper with a helipad. His brilliance lay in thinking beyond the conventional mud brick structures of his time. He was the first to build exclusively with stone on a monumental scale, a material far more durable and difficult to breach than sun-dried mud. This shift from ephemeral mud to eternal stone was a profound ideological and practical leap. It wasn't just about making the tomb harder to break into, it was about making it a permanent fixture on the landscape, an unassailable symbol of Djoser's divinity and eternal rule. Imhotep understood that visibility and overwhelming scale could be their own form of security, intimidating would-be robbers before they even picked up a tool. He wasn't just securing a dead king, he was solidifying an entire dynasty's claim to immortality. And his masterpiece? The Step Pyramid Complex at Saqqara. This wasn't just a bigger mastaba, it was a revolutionary leap in paranoia. Instead of one mud brick bench, Imhotep stacked 6 mastabas of diminishing size on top of each other, creating the world's first truly monumental stone building. It wasn't a pyramid in the classic sense yet, more like a giant tiered wedding cake for a dead king. But the impact was seismic. Suddenly, you weren't just dealing with a few meters of dirt and brick. You were facing a structure that dominated the skyline, visible for miles. It was a beacon of Djoser's power, a promise of his eternal prosperity, and an absolutely irresistible challenge for anyone with a crowbar and an iron will. This was the moment ancient Egyptian security went from modest deterrent to full-blown architectural aggression. It was audacious, it was groundbreaking, and it was still, somehow, destined to be thoroughly ransacked. The complex wasn't just the pyramid itself. It included a vast walled enclosure with elaborate courtyards, temples, and dummy buildings, all designed to disorient and impress. The sheer scale was overwhelming. Imagine approaching this monumental structure, a colossal edifice of stone rising against the desert sky, when all you've ever seen are mud brick houses. It would have felt like encountering an alien spaceship. The enclosure wall itself was designed with 14 false entrances, with only one true entrance. It was like a giant, ancient escape room, only the prize was a dead king's fortune, and the penalty for failure was probably death. This complex was a statement of power, but it was also a statement of profound paranoia, an early warning that the pharaohs were getting serious about their afterlife security. And the more serious they got, the more tempting the target became for those who had nothing to lose. But the true genius, or perhaps the true madness, of Imhotep's design lay beneath the surface. While the step pyramid loomed majestically above, beneath it lay a bewildering network of passages, galleries, shafts, and chambers, spiraling out like a particularly stressful ant farm. Imagine trying to navigate that. There were false passages designed to lead you astray, dead ends that would frustrate even the most determined treasure hunter, and a genuinely baffling underground maze that must have been a nightmare to construct, let alone to try and rob. The actual burial chamber, encased in granite, was deep below the center of the pyramid, accessed by a vertical shaft almost 30 meters deep. It was like a game of ancient Egyptian Dungeons and Dragons. Only instead of goblins, you were battling endless corridors and the crushing weight of several million tons of stone. You can almost picture the ancient robbers emerging from a fake passage, covered in dust, muttering curses about Imhotep and his overly elaborate design choices. The subterranean network beneath Djoser's step pyramid is astonishing in its complexity and sheer volume. It's not just a few rooms. It's miles of tunnels, storerooms, and false passages, some decorated with beautiful blue faience tiles, others left rough-hewn. The main shaft to the burial chamber was so deep and so perfectly cut that it was a feat of engineering in itself. Once the sarcophagus was lowered, the shaft was filled with rubble and capped with a massive, precisely cut granite plug. The idea was to create a truly impenetrable subterranean fortress. But even here, robbers eventually found a way in, demonstrating that no matter how complex the maze, a persistent human with a chisel and a hunger for gold will eventually chart a course. The frustration of navigating such a labyrinth in absolute darkness with only the flickering light of an oil lamp must have been immense. It's a testament to the robbers' sheer stubbornness and Imhotep's glorious, if ultimately futile, ambition. This was more than just a structural upgrade. It represented a fundamental philosophical shift in tomb security. The old mantra of hide it well and hope for the best was out. The new strategy, pioneered by Imhotep, was make it so utterly, ridiculously, physically, and mentally too much trouble that even the most desperate bandit will throw their hands up in despair and just go home. It was a strategy of deterrence through sheer architectural frustration. The pharaohs were essentially saying, yes, there are treasures here, but do you really want to spend weeks, months, or even years trying to find them, drilling through solid rock, navigating pitch-black labyrinths, only to find another dead end? Didn't think so. Now off you go. There's a perfectly good field of barley to harvest. Of course, this strategy, like all strategies against human greed, proved to be about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. But credit where credit is due. Imhotep certainly made the robbers work for it, and for that, we salute his dark, brilliant mind. This philosophical shift wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a calculated response to previous failures. The mud brick mastabas were simply too easy. Imhotep recognized that human nature, while driven by greed, also had limits to its patience and endurance. If you could make the effort disproportionate to the perceived reward, or at least make the effort so soul-crushingly difficult that it felt disproportionate, you might just succeed. It was a war of attrition, fought with stone and sweat. The labyrinthine passages and false chambers weren't just random architectural choices. They were deliberate acts of psychological warfare, designed to break the spirit of the intruder before they even reached the king. It was a sophisticated understanding of criminal psychology, a brilliant attempt to exploit human fatigue and frustration. That it ultimately failed is less a critique of Imhotep's genius and more a testament to the boundless, terrifying, and often inspiring tenacity of human avarice. Fast forward a bit, and we arrive at the 4th dynasty, where Pharaoh Sneferu enters the stage, ready to flex some serious architectural muscle. But Sneferu, bless his ambitious soul, was a king of trial and error. He didn't just build one pyramid, he built 3 major ones, each a stepping stone, or in some cases a stumbling block, towards the iconic Giza pyramids. These weren't just monuments, they were R&D projects for post-mortem security, each one revealing new challenges, new structural quirks, and new ways to accidentally create new types of traps. Imagine being Sneferu's hand architect. All right, sir, for this one, we're thinking less mud brick bench, more collapsing pile of regret. Just kidding, mostly. His 3 grand experiments, Medum, the bent pyramid, and the red pyramid, showcase a king obsessed with perfection, or at least with getting something right before his own inevitable eternal slumber. Sneferu's reign was a period of intense architectural experimentation, driven by a desire to create a true, smooth-sided pyramid, a shape representing the primeval mound from which creation emerged, and a cosmic ramp for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the sun god Ra. But getting that perfect geometric shape in solid stone was harder than it looked. His first attempt at Medum, which began as a step pyramid and was later converted, faced structural issues. Its outer casing eventually collapsed in antiquity, leaving behind a core that looks like a 3-tiered tower. It was a grand vision, a bold step, but it revealed the critical challenges of building with such immense weight and scale. Each of Sneferu's projects was a lesson learned, often the hard way, in structural integrity, material science, and the art of pyramid construction. He was literally building the future of royal tombs, one ambitious, sometimes wobbly, experiment at a time. And in doing so, he laid the groundwork for the most famous death traps of all. One of Sneferu's major innovations, and a significant step towards the Giza design, was the widespread adoption of internal passages and chambers. Prior to this, you mostly dug a shaft under a mastaba or pyramid, but Sneferu's builders started integrating the burial chamber within the stone mass itself, accessed by descending corridors that often began high up on the pyramid face. Why build a massive, perfectly proportioned pile of stones if you just dig a simple hole underneath it? It seemed inefficient. So they started boring tunnels into the heart of the pyramid, creating more complex internal layouts. This meant more opportunities for misdirection, for hidden chambers, and for, you guessed it, more traps. Suddenly, the challenge wasn't just to dig down. It was to navigate a deliberate maze of stone in pitch darkness with tons of rock pressing in from all sides. A claustrophobe's worst nightmare and a robber's new, highly irritating puzzle. The Medum Pyramid, despite its eventual collapse, already featured a sophisticated descending passage that led to a corbelled chamber deep within the masonry. The Bent Pyramid took this further with 2 distinct internal systems. This was a radical departure from the earlier dig a shaft, fill it method. Now the internal structure was part of the defense, a deliberate labyrinth of tunnels and rooms. Imagine the precision required to carve these passages into millions of tons of stone, ensuring they met up exactly where intended. This internal architecture allowed for more elaborate blocking mechanisms, false passages, and multiple chambers designed to confuse and exhaust. It elevated tomb security from merely hiding something to actively concealing it within a monumental puzzle. For Sneferu, the pyramid was not just a shell, It was a carefully engineered brain teaser for eternity, a Stone Age escape room designed by a monarch. Now, Sneferu's second pyramid at Dashur, the infamous Bent Pyramid, is a glorious testament to ancient Egyptian engineering snafus. Initially, it was designed with a steep angle, but as it rose, structural stresses became apparent. It was starting to crack, groan, and look like it might just spontaneously disassemble itself. So, mid-construction, they dramatically changed the angle, making the upper section noticeably shallower. Hence, bent. But here's the darkly comedic twist. This engineering failure inadvertently added layers of complexity for future intruders. The Bent Pyramid ended up with 2 distinct entrances and 2 separate internal passage systems, leading to 2 burial chambers. Why 2? Nobody's entirely sure, but the prevailing theory is that the original lower chamber was abandoned when the structural issues arose, and a new, safer upper chamber was created. So, what was a colossal headache for the ancient builders became a magnificent misdirection for later robbers. 2 entrances, 2 paths, double the frustration. It's like accidentally building a security system by tripping over your own feet. Brilliant, in a purely accidental way. The Bent Pyramid's design is a fascinating peek into the real-world problems faced by ancient engineers. They started with a bold, aggressive angle, perhaps trying to outdo Djoser. But as the sheer weight of the stone began to cause subsidence and cracking, they had to quickly adapt. The change in angle not only gave the pyramid its distinctive bent appearance, but also resulted in a significantly more complex interior than initially planned. The 2 separate entrances, one on the north and one on the west, each led to its own system of descending passages and chambers. This meant that any robber would have to contend with not 1, but 2 potential paths to the burial. Was the king in the lower chamber, the upper? Or was he somewhere else entirely? This unplanned complexity was a boon for security, turning an engineering headache into an accidental labyrinth. Sneferu probably fumed at the sight of his bent pyramid, but his future, long-dead self was undoubtedly quite pleased with the unforeseen deterrent. But Sneferu's reign wasn't just about architectural experimentation. It was about getting serious with blocking mechanisms. Forget the simple, rubble-filled shafts of the mastabas. Here, we start to see the primitive yet formidable use of massive stone blocks, sometimes weighing many tons, meticulously cut to slide down and seal passages. This was the precursor to the portcullis system that would become a staple of later pyramids. Imagine a perfectly smooth, polished stone block dropped from above, sealing a corridor with a definitive thud. It wasn't just a barrier. It was a statement. You want in? You're going to have to move that. And that could be a 20-ton piece of solid granite. They also experimented with filling descending passages with enormous plugs of masonry, making it impossible to traverse without serious excavation. These early traps were less about cunning and more about brute force, physically blocking the path with something impossibly heavy. It was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of putting a gigantic safe door on your bedroom just to keep your kids out. And you know what? It probably worked, at least for a little while, until someone invented a better chisel, or, more likely, just found a way to tunnel around the problem. In the Bent Pyramid, for example, the descending passages had multiple blocking stones, some designed to be lowered after the burial, effectively sealing the way. These were often large, custom-cut blocks, sometimes with grooves in the walls to guide their descent. The challenge was not just to construct them, but to manage their deployment during the burial ceremony. Imagine the precision needed to lower a multi-ton stone block into place without damaging the passage, or worse, trapping the funeral party inside. This required intricate systems of ropes, counterweights, and temporary supports, all to be removed or cut at the precise moment. These were not subtle traps. They were blunt instruments of deterrence, designed to stop intruders through sheer physical impossibility. But as history shows, where there's an impossibly heavy block, there's usually a clever way to bypass it. The ancient robbers weren't afraid of a little heavy lifting, especially when there was gold on the other side. And so we arrive at Giza, the ultimate flex of royal power, the pinnacle of pharaonic ambition, and the undisputed champions of post-mortem property defense. Here, the kings Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure didn't just build tombs, they built mountains. They sculpted the very earth to house their eternal slumber, creating monuments that have defied millennia. These aren't just pyramids, they're the ultimate hold-my-beer moment in ancient history. You see Djoser's Step Pyramid and Sneferu's Bent Pyramid? Khufu, with the Great Pyramid, said, "Cute, now watch this." The Giza pyramids weren't just about ensuring a comfortable afterlife. They were about projecting unimaginable power, securing a legacy for all eternity, and, quite frankly, rubbing it in everyone's faces. They are the ancient world's equivalent of a billionaire's fortified bunker, only significantly grander and with a lot more polished limestone. The Giza Plateau, rising majestically from the desert floor, became the stage for the greatest architectural spectacle the ancient world had ever seen. The sheer audacity of the project is almost incomprehensible. Millions of precisely cut stone blocks, some weighing upwards of 80 tons, transported and assembled with a level of accuracy that still baffles modern engineers. This wasn't just about constructing a tomb. It was about building a cosmic machine, an eternal beacon, aligned with astronomical precision, designed to facilitate the pharaoh's journey to the stars. And in doing so, they created the most visible, most iconic, and most irresistible targets for tomb robbers in all of history. The Giza pyramids are not just tombs. They are declarations of invincibility, defiant shouts against the relentless march of time and the insidious creep of human greed. That they were ultimately breached is a testament to the unyielding power of both. Let's talk about the Great Pyramid of Khufu. You think it's just a big pile of stones? Oh, you sweet summer child. It's not just big, it's baffling. It's a marvel of engineering, a masterclass in cunning deception, and a geological middle finger to anyone who thought they could waltz in and grab some gold. Externally, it's a geometric wonder, rising to a colossal height, covered in gleaming white limestone, which, sadly, is mostly gone now, harvested by later generations for their own building projects, a testament to human recycling and desecration. But internally, it's where the real magic and the real headaches begin. This isn't a simple, straight shot to the burial chamber. It's a meticulously designed labyrinth, a complex puzzle box carved from millions of tons of stone. You'd need a map, a compass, and probably a very strong sedative to navigate it successfully, and even then, good luck. The Great Pyramid, originally standing at 146 meters, 481 feet, was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Its gleaming white casing stones, now mostly gone, would have reflected the desert sun with blinding intensity, making it an awe-inspiring sight. but the external grandeur merely hinted at the internal complexity. Unlike Sneferu's bent pyramid, with its two main passages, Khufu's pyramid famously features three primary chambers, each seemingly designed to be the main burial room, but only one ultimately used. This multi-chambered approach, combined with the incredibly long and narrow passages, the dizzying grand gallery, and the various blocking mechanisms, created a truly bewildering interior. It was less a tomb and more a colossal existential escape room, designed to make intruders question their life choices before they ever got close to the real treasure. And it did a remarkably good job of it, for a while. Within Khufu's Great Pyramid, you don't just have a burial chamber, you have options. There's the subterranean chamber, carved deep into the bedrock, which appears to have been abandoned. Then there's this so-called Queen's Chamber, perfectly formed, but seemingly never used for a burial. And finally, the grand finale, the main event, the King's Chamber, a perfectly proportioned granite box deep within the pyramid's core. Each of these chambers, and the passages leading to them, were miniature fortresses, each designed with distinct protective measures. The King's Chamber, for example, is protected by three massive granite portcullis blocks, each weighing tens of tons, designed to slide down into place. Above it, a series of 5 relieving chambers with enormous lintel blocks prevents the unimaginable weight of the pyramid above from crushing it flat. It's like building a panic room inside a bomb shelter, which is inside a fortress. It was an exercise in over-engineering taken to divine levels. The King's Chamber, constructed entirely from red Aswan granite, is an architectural marvel. Its precision-fitted blocks, weighing up to 80 tons each, form a perfect rectangular room with a single, lidless granite sarcophagus. The passages leading to it, particularly the Grand Gallery, were designed with a dual purpose: procession and protection. The 3 granite portcullis blocks, now visible in the ascending passage, were designed to be lowered after the burial, sealing the King's Chamber from the outside world. And above the King's Chamber, the 5 relieving chambers were a structural stroke of genius, diverting the immense weight of the masonry above around the chamber, preventing its collapse. These were not subtle defenses. They were overt, brute force declarations of impenetrable security. The builders of Giza were not just architects. They were strategic military engineers, applying the principles of fortification to the eternal resting place of their divine king. The genius of the Giza builders, these anonymous architects and engineers, lies not just in their ability to move millions of stone blocks and align them with astronomical precision. No, their true brilliance was in the implicit challenge they posed. Let's make it so grand and seemingly impenetrable, so utterly overwhelming in its scale and complexity that no one will dare. It was psychological warfare on a truly monumental scale. The idea was to intimidate, to awe, to make any would-be robber reconsider their life choices simply by gazing upon its majesty. They wanted to create a masterpiece that screamed, "This is consecrated ground. Touch it and face the wrath of the gods." Narrator: they dared. Oh, how they dared. History is replete with examples of people daring to do things they really, really shouldn't, especially when gold is involved. The Giza pyramids, despite their incredible defenses, were ultimately breached and plundered in antiquity. But for a moment, just a moment, they must have believed they had created true, eternal security. Imagine the awe and fear these structures would have inspired in ancient times. To common people, they must have seemed like the work of gods themselves, a testament to unimaginable power. The pharaohs believed this awe would be a powerful deterrent, that the sheer scale would communicate a divine untouchability. It was a strategy of deterrence through sheer grandeur, relying on the intimidation factor to keep looters away. And for a time, perhaps, it worked against the less determined or less well-resourced individuals. But human history is a testament to the fact that awe eventually fades, and desperation, or ambition, often triumphs over fear. The Giza builders created the ultimate symbol of eternal security, but they failed to account for the eternal nature of human greed. Their genius was undeniable, but their ultimate goal remained elusive, a testament to the persistent, indomitable spirit of those who simply wanted what was inside. All right, let's descend into the heart of Khufu's Great Pyramid, specifically into what is arguably its most impressive and unsettling interior feature, the Grand Gallery. You've ascended the narrow ascending passage, probably scraping your knees and developing a healthy dose of claustrophobia. Then, suddenly, it opens up. Before you lies a colossal sloping corridor, almost 8.5 meters high and 47 meters long. Its walls are crafted from massive, perfectly fitted limestone blocks, rising in a corbelled vault, meaning each course of stone projects slightly inward from the one below, forming a tall, narrow, inverted V-shape. It's breathtaking, a masterpiece of ancient engineering, and, frankly, a bit unsettling. It feels less like a passageway and more like an enormous, ancient cannon barrel aimed directly at your unsuspecting face. The Grand Gallery is truly a marvel. The sheer precision of its construction, the way the enormous limestone blocks are fitted together without mortar, and the perfect symmetry of its corbelled ceiling all speak to an astonishing level of craftsmanship. The sloping floor, with its central ramp and deep, precisely cut notches along the sides, contributes to the unsettling feeling of being in a space designed for a purpose far grander and perhaps more dangerous than mere passage. The acoustics within the gallery are also remarkable, amplifying sounds and creating an eerie echo that would have further disoriented and intimidated any intruder. It was a space designed to impress, to inspire awe, and, as we'll soon discover, to quite literally seal the fate of anyone inside. It's a testament to the Egyptians' ability to create functional beauty, even when that function was to make sure you stayed out of their king's eternal bedroom. But the Grand Gallery wasn't just an architectural flex, a triumphant display of building prowess. Oh no, that would be far too simple for the paranoid minds of the Fourth Dynasty. Its secondary, and arguably more sinister function, was as a launching ramp. Yes, a launching ramp. Along the floor of the gallery, you'd notice a series of deep, precisely cut notches. These weren't for decoration, my friend. These were critical components of a highly ingenious, deeply physical trap. The entire purpose of this magnificent, soaring space was to hold, for a precise moment in time, an arsenal of massive granite blocks ready to be deployed. It was a giant internal catapult, preloaded with pure, unadulterated tomb security. These notches along the side of the ramp were designed to hold the heavy granite plugs that would eventually seal the ascending passage below. Imagine the scene. After the pharaoh's burial, these massive blocks, each weighing many tons, would be carefully positioned in the gallery, held in place by temporary supports, possibly ropes or wooden beams. The entire gallery effectively became a gigantic magazine for these stone projectiles. The sheer weight and force of these blocks, once released, would be unstoppable. They weren't just decorative architectural elements. They were integral parts of a sophisticated mechanical system, a marvel of ancient engineering designed to ensure the eternal security of the king. It was a grand, terrifying, and utterly ingenious mechanism, a final, definitive barrier against the avarice of the living. Here's how this granite-powered panic system was supposed to work. After the pharaoh's mummified remains and all his fabulous funerary treasures were safely ensconced in the king's chamber, the funeral party, led by the last priest, would begin their retreat. As they backed down the grand gallery and into the narrower ascending passage, they would trigger a mechanism, likely by releasing ropes or supports, that would send enormous granite plugs, which had been resting in those floor notches, hurtling down the inclined gallery. These massive blocks, perfectly sized to fill the ascending passage below, would then jam themselves into place, sealing the tomb from the inside. Imagine the cacophony, the rumbling, the grinding, the final, earth-shaking thud as several tons of solid granite slid home, turning the passage into an impassable, solid wall of stone. It was a one-way trip, a truly permanent do not disturb sign. The precision required for this operation was astonishing. The granite plugs had to be cut to exact specifications to fit snugly within the ascending passage. The slope of the grand gallery had to be perfect to allow them to slide with sufficient momentum, and the timing of the release had to be flawless. This was a complex, choreographed event, the final act of the burial ceremony, transforming a grand processional pathway into an impenetrable barrier. Once these blocks were in place, they would be incredibly difficult to dislodge, let alone move. They formed a solid, unyielding wall of stone, a final declaration that the king's rest was to be undisturbed. It was the ultimate architectural mic drop, a resounding thud that echoed through the heart of the pyramid, sealing the pharaoh's eternal abode with crushing finality. Now, imagine being that last priest. You've just performed the final rituals. You've sealed the king of all Egypt in his eternal granite box, and now it's your turn to leave. You're backing down the gallery, knowing that at any moment those gargantuan granite blocks could start to slide. You're praying to Osiris that the trigger mechanisms are perfectly timed, that the ropes don't fray, that nothing goes wrong. Because if those blocks came crashing down too early, if you weren't fast enough, if a piece of rubble snagged the works, you wouldn't just be trapped. You'd be turned into ancient pharaonic jam, a very messy, very unfortunate addition to the tomb's security features. You'd be the ultimate sacrifice for a pharaoh who probably didn't even notice your absence. It's a truly dark comedic image. A priest, frantically scrambling, hearing the ominous rumble of impending doom, all because someone wanted to protect a few £1,000s of gold from very determined grave robbers. The job description definitely didn't mention potential for granite-induced flattening. The pressure on that last priest must have been immense. Not only was he ensuring the eternal well-being of his divine king, but he was also risking his own mortal neck. The margin for error would have been razor thin. One false step, one moment of panic, and he would become a permanent, pulverized fixture in the tomb's security system. It's a vivid image of the ultimate commitment to a job, or perhaps just a profound fear of displeasing a dead pharaoh. And for the ancient tomb robbers who eventually bypassed this system, imagine the effort involved in digging around those immense blocks, or, as some speculate, entering through a lower, undiscovered passage. The Grand Gallery Gambit was a masterpiece of deadly engineering, a testament to the pharaoh's willingness to go to extreme lengths, even at the cost of their own staff, to secure their post-mortem treasures. All right, let's talk about the Great Pyramid's greatest enigma, and arguably one of its most impressive acts of architectural trolling, the Queen's Chamber. You're inside this colossal structure, navigating the passages, and then you come across it. A beautifully crafted, corbel vaulted room, almost square in plan, deep within the pyramid's heart. It's too grand to be a mere storage closet, too carefully constructed to be an afterthought. So why build such a magnificent chamber and then, seemingly, not use it for its intended purpose? It's completely empty, save for a niche in the eastern wall. No sarcophagus, no mummy, no gilded treasures. It's like building a grand ballroom in your house, but then just using it to store old holiday decorations. What gives, Khufu? What gives? The Queen's Chamber, measuring approximately 5.75 meters by 5.23 meters with a height of 26 meters, is a significant space. Its corbelled roof, rising to a point, mirrors the Grand Gallery and speaks of monumental effort. The niche in its eastern wall, about 1.6 meters deep, would have been perfect for housing a statue or a chest. Yet it sits empty, devoid of any funerary goods or evidence of a burial. This has led to endless speculation among Egyptologists. Was it truly intended for a queen, whose burial plans changed? Was it a decoy from the start, part of a grander deception? Or was it simply an abandoned project, its purpose shifted during the long, complex construction of the pyramid? The uncertainty adds to its mystique and, quite frankly, its genius as a security feature. It's a room that screams important, while simultaneously whispering, "Nothing to see here." This, my friends, is the decoy principle in action, writ large in limestone. The Queen's Chamber wasn't just an abandoned project. It was a monumental misdirection, a grand architectural red herring designed to confuse, exhaust, and ultimately infuriate any would-be intruder. Imagine being a tomb robber, tunneling for weeks, breaking through stone, anticipating the ultimate prize. You finally breach a passage, you crawl your way into this grand chamber, heart pounding with anticipation, and it's empty. Just a dusty room, smelling of stale air and crushed dreams. The sheer psychological impact of such a discovery would be immense. You'd be demoralized, you'd be questioning your life choices, and you'd have wasted precious time and effort. It's the ancient equivalent of a bait-and-switch, a cosmic prank played by a dead king on anyone foolish enough to try and steal his afterlife slippers. The presence of the Queen's Chamber, strategically placed on the same level as the Grand Gallery and King's Chamber passages, creates a fork in the road for any intruder. Which path leads to the real treasure? The one that appears to go up, or the one that leads into this seemingly important, yet ultimately empty room? It's a classic choice paralysis scenario, exacerbated by the high stakes and claustrophobic conditions. A robber might spend days or weeks meticulously searching the queen's chamber, convinced it held hidden riches, only to find nothing. This wasted effort, this profound disappointment, would serve as a powerful psychological deterrent designed to break the will of even the most determined thief. It's a testament to the pharaohs' sophisticated understanding of criminal psychology, using architecture to play mind games with anyone daring to disturb their eternal repose. And then there are the air shafts of the queen's chamber. These are two narrow, precisely cut shafts, one leading north, one south, just like those in the king's chamber. For centuries, they were assumed to be for ventilation or celestial alignment, linking the king's spirit to specific stars. But here's the kicker. Unlike the king's chamber shafts, these ones don't reach the outside of the pyramid. Instead, they terminate behind small, mysterious stone doors, one of which has two copper handles. These doors, famously explored by robotic rovers in the last few decades, have fueled intense archaeological debate. Are they genuinely blocked passages to secret chambers? Or are they part of a complex symbolic system? Or, here's a thought, were they meant to look like potential entry points for future robbers, forcing them to waste even more time and effort chiseling through them, only to find another dead end, or worse, another layer of solid rock? The pharaohs were clearly masters of the double bluff. The mystery of these shafts and their doors is one of the enduring enigmas of the Great Pyramid. The northern shaft's door was discovered in 1993 by a robot called Upuat II, revealing a small limestone slab with two corroded copper handles. A decade later, another robot, Pyramid Rover, drilled through this door, only to find a small cavity and another blocking stone. The southern shaft's door, equally mysterious, also has similar copper protrusions. The debate rages. Are these actual doors to undiscovered chambers, perhaps holding a hidden antechamber for the queen, or even secret royal scrolls? Or are they yet another layer of deception, designed to tantalize and mislead? The copper handles themselves are puzzling. Are they functional or merely symbolic? It's the ultimate ancient Egyptian cliffhanger, a series of enigmatic doors designed to keep us guessing and perhaps to keep ancient robbers perpetually digging in the wrong direction. The pharaohs, it seems, had an absolutely unparalleled flair for the dramatically pointless when it came to their afterlives. Building a magnificent chamber, making it look important, putting in fake shafts, and then leaving it completely empty? That's not just security. That's performance art. It's a statement about wealth and power that says, I have so much stuff, I can afford to build entire royal chambers and leave them completely unoccupied just to mess with anyone trying to steal my actual treasures. It's an act of supreme, passive-aggressive defiance from beyond the grave. And honestly, you have to admire the sheer audacity of it. Imagine the architects presenting this plan. So, Your Majesty, we'll build this glorious chamber. It will impress everyone, and then we will fill it with absolutely nothing, just to make future generations scratch their heads in utter bewilderment. Brilliant, the pharaoh would undoubtedly exclaim. Double the mystery, double the frustration. Excellent work, chap. This level of architectural trolling speaks volumes about the pharaoh's priorities. Their concern wasn't just physical security, it was mental and emotional deterrence. They wanted to crush the spirits of their potential plunderers, to make them feel utterly foolish and defeated even before they reached the true prize. The Queen's Chamber is a monument to this strategy, a beautiful, elaborate trap of nothingness. It's like unwrapping a beautifully presented, expensive gift box, only to find it filled with packing peanuts and a note that says, "Gotcha." You might still eventually find the real present, but the experience would be deeply, fundamentally unsatisfying. The Pharaohs understood that a little bit of well-placed frustration could go a long, long way in protecting their eternal bling. So, you thought we were done with Khufu's Great Pyramid? Ha ha! You underestimate the sheer, obsessive paranoia of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. Beyond the Grand Gallery, beyond the Queen's Chamber, there are even more subtle, more insidious layers of defense. I'm talking about the smaller, internal shafts and passages discovered deep within the pyramid, blocked not by your run-of-the-mill massive portcullis blocks, but by unique sliding stones. These aren't the dramatic, crashing barriers we discussed earlier. These are more like hidden bolts, secret locks tucked away in the pyramid's stony innards, designed to slow down the most tenacious of robbers. They are a testament to the idea that if one layer of security isn't enough, just add another, and then maybe one more for good measure. These shafts, often only 20 by 20 centimeters, about 8 by 8 inches wide, were originally thought to be for ventilation or astronomical alignment. But as exploration continued, particularly with modern robotic technologies, their true nature as subtle blocking mechanisms began to emerge. They are too small for humans to enter, but large enough to house these unique portcullis-like sliding stones. These weren't designed to be dropped from above, but rather to slide horizontally or vertically within their narrow confines, sealing off whatever lay beyond. It's an almost microscopic level of security detail, a testament to the comprehensive nature of the Great Pyramid's defenses. The builders were thinking about every possible angle, every potential weak point, even those that would only be accessible through immense effort, or, as it turns out, through tiny robots. Now, how do we know about these delightfully subtle yet infuriatingly effective mechanisms? Enter the modern era, my friends, and the unsung heroes of tomb exploration, the robotic rovers. These plucky little machines, armed with drills, cameras, and an almost superhuman ability to squeeze into impossibly tight spaces, have been sent spelunking into these hidden shafts. Projects like the Giza project have drilled through those tiny doors at the end of the Queen's Chamber shafts, revealing not treasure, but another stone door further along. And in the King's Chamber shafts, similar explorations have revealed fascinating blocking mechanisms. Unique sliding stones, almost like internal portcullises, but operating within very narrow, precisely cut grooves. It's like watching a real-life Indiana Jones adventure, but instead of Harrison Ford, you've got a Roomba with a very expensive camera. These robotic explorers are essentially modern-day tomb robbers, but with archaeological permits and significantly less interest in gold. The technology used for these explorations is truly remarkable. These aren't just off-the-shelf robots. They are custom-built, miniature marvels of engineering, designed to navigate the precise and often precarious conditions within the pyramid's shafts. They've discovered not only the existence of these doors and sliding blocks, but also the meticulous precision with which they were crafted. The images sent back are breathtaking, revealing perfectly smooth surfaces, precisely cut grooves, and the enigmatic copper handles that have puzzled researchers for decades. These robotic forays represent the cutting edge of non-invasive archaeology, allowing us to explore the ancient world's innermost secrets without disturbing them. They've shown us that the Pharaohs' engineers were thinking on multiple scales, designing traps not just for human-sized intruders, but for any potential breach, no matter how small. So, why go to such incredible lengths? Why add these intricate, hidden barriers, these robotic sliders, deep within a structure already overflowing with defensive measures? The why is simple: more layers of granite, more delays. The ancient Egyptians understood the psychology of the thief. Every extra barrier, every unexpected turn, every minute spent chiseling through another slab of stone adds to the frustration, the exhaustion, and the risk for the robber. These hidden blocks weren't designed to be impenetrable forever, but to create maximum delay and frustration. They were like the world's most annoying captchas, designed to wear down the human spirit one chipped away stone at a time. Oh, you made it past the Grand Gallery blocks? Good for you. Now enjoy another 20 tons of granite. And after that, who knows? Maybe a particularly grumpy scarab beetle. Have fun. The strategy was one of attrition. The more obstacles, the more time, the more noise, the more risk of detection. Every additional layer of defense, no matter how small or subtle, contributed to the overall security profile. These tiny, hidden blocks were the architectural equivalent of a deep, complicated password, designed to be incredibly time-consuming to crack. They demonstrate an obsessive attention to detail and a profound commitment to securing every possible entry point. The pharaohs weren't just thinking about the obvious main entrance, they were considering every crack, every fissure, every potential tunnel. It's a level of comprehensive security planning that would impress even the most cynical modern-day security consultant. Yes, we've secured the main vault. But what about the tiny, secret vent shaft that only a robot could access? We've got a block for that too. And here, my friends, is the ultimate irony, the cruel twist in this ancient tale of security and greed. Despite all this ingenuity, despite the colossal scale, the baffling internal structures, the Grand Gallery's granite gambit, the Queen's chamber's cunning misdirection, and these robotic sliders within the hidden shafts, despite every single meticulously planned defense, the Great Pyramid was still successfully breached and looted in antiquity. Every last piece of royal bling, every golden bauble, every precious amulet, gone. It stands as a testament not just to the brilliance of the Egyptian architects, but to the even greater brilliance, or perhaps sheer stubbornness, of the ancient tomb robbers. They found a way. They always found a way. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That even a civilization capable of building something as monumental and complex as the Great Pyramid couldn't outsmart a few determined individuals with rudimentary tools and a serious case of sticky fingers. It's almost depressing, but in a funny, dark, sarcastic kind of way. The exact methods used by ancient robbers to bypass all these layers of defense are still debated. Some speculate they may have tunneled into the pyramid from outside, perhaps finding a softer spot in the masonry or exploiting a structural weakness. Others suggest they simply found ways to chip away at the blocking stones, slowly but surely creating a path. Regardless of the method, the fact remains that the Great Pyramid, the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian security, was ultimately compromised. It's a stark reminder that human ingenuity, particularly when fueled by desperation or avarice, often finds a way around even the most formidable barriers. The pharaohs built monuments to eternity, but the robbers proved that even eternity could be ransacked. A truly enduring and darkly amusing historical lesson. All right, so far we've been talking about physical barriers, big stones, confusing passages, the sheer unadulterated annoyance of a complex layout. But the ancient Egyptians, being deeply spiritual and highly superstitious people, knew that a good security system wasn't just about rocks and hidden shafts. It also needed a healthy dose of psychological warfare. So, alongside their massive granite blocks, they deployed a different kind of weapon: magical threats. We're talking about the evolution of tomb defense to include supernatural deterrence, turning the very walls of the tomb into a silent, spectral bodyguard. Because if you can't crush them with a falling block, maybe you can scare them into a slow, agonizing death via divine retribution. This shift towards magical threats became increasingly prominent as tomb designs evolved, particularly from the late Old Kingdom onwards. The pharaohs understood that physical barriers, no matter how ingenious, could be breached. But what about threats that transcended the physical realm? What about spiritual consequences that could affect one's eternal soul? For a profoundly religious society like ancient Egypt, these were far more terrifying prospects than mere bodily harm. The goal was to instill a sense of dread, a primal fear of divine punishment that would make any potential robber hesitate, even tremble. It was a sophisticated, if ultimately flawed, attempt to weaponize belief itself, to turn the very fabric of their spiritual world into a deterrent. Think less alarm system and more excommunication from the afterlife. These magical threats first appeared in the form of the pyramid texts. These aren't the curses you hear about in Hollywood movies. May your fingernails fall out, or may you be perpetually late for all appointments. No, these were far more existential. Inscribed on the walls of the burial chambers and sarcophagi, particularly in the pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties, around 2494 to 2181 BCE, these texts were the earliest known funerary spells and warnings. They weren't always direct curses in the modern sense. Often, they were appeals to the gods to protect the deceased and ensure their rebirth, but interwoven within them were dire warnings. May the crocodile god devour anyone who enters this sacred space. Or, may the wrath of Thoth be visited upon he who disturbs these offerings. They were the ultimate no trespassing signs, written in the language of the gods, designed to strike terror into the heart of any peasant contemplating a quick snatch and grab. These pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious texts in the world, were originally found carved into the walls of the burial chambers of pharaohs like Unas, Teti, Pepi I, and Pepi II. They contained a collection of spells, incantations, and rituals designed to assist the deceased king in his journey through the underworld and ensure his successful resurrection and eternal life among the gods. But within these sacred passages, there were also explicit warnings directed at those who might dare to disturb the king's eternal rest or steal his offerings. These weren't vague threats. They were often very specific, invoking specific deities and specific gruesome fates. The intent was not just to protect the physical body and treasures, but to safeguard the very process of the pharaoh's eternal transformation, which was essential for the cosmic order of Egypt. This was psychological warfare at its finest, tailored for a superstitious populace. The curses preyed on ancient fears, the fear of divine retribution, of eternal damnation, of having your name erased from existence, which for an ancient Egyptian was arguably worse than death. Imagine being a tomb robber, tunneling through the dark, and suddenly your oil lamp flickers across a wall inscription that promises you'll be eternally plagued by scorpions, or that your soul will be denied entry into the field of reeds. Even if you don't believe it entirely, that little seed of doubt, that whisper of dread, might make you think twice. It was about creating an invisible force field of spiritual menace, a lingering aura of cosmic disapproval. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of putting a very stern-looking garden gnome outside your house, only this gnome can summon plagues. The threats extended beyond immediate physical harm. To an ancient Egyptian, the integrity of your name, your legacy, and your ability to transition successfully to the afterlife were paramount. To have your name erased, to be denied sustenance in the duat, to be perpetually hungry and thirsty, these were fates worse than any physical punishment. The curses often promised these spiritual torments to those who violated the tomb. It was a deeply sophisticated form of deterrence, targeting the very spiritual fabric of their existence. For a truly devout individual, the fear of divine retribution and eternal suffering would have been a powerful disincentive. It's a genius move, really, if your target audience believes in your gods. The pharaohs were playing the long game, betting on the eternal fear of the unknown. And what about the translation of these ominous warnings? Often flowery, always ominous, frequently invoking the fiercest deities in the Egyptian pantheon. They spoke of eternal hunger, of being consumed by mythical beasts, of losing your spiritual essence. They were grand, eloquent, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who actually believed them. But against a starving peasant with a chisel and a family to feed, less so. When your children are hungry, the threat of being eaten by a spectral crocodile in the afterlife probably ranks slightly lower than the immediate threat of starvation in this one. So while the pharaohs poured their resources into divine threats, the realities of human desperation often rendered them moot. It turns out, even the most eloquent curse has a hard time competing with a growling stomach. So, a valiant effort, pharaohs, truly. But perhaps a little less poetry, a little more practical application. The problem with psychological warfare, especially of the spiritual kind, is that it only works if your target audience is sufficiently terrified by the consequences. For many impoverished ancient Egyptians, immediate survival likely trumped fears of a distant, abstract spiritual torment. A family could starve today, or they could risk the wrath of Osiris for a handful of gold that would allow them to eat for a month. The choice, for many, was unfortunately clear. Furthermore, the priests and scribes who would have read and understood these texts were often the very ones involved in the looting. Their intimate knowledge of the religious landscape perhaps made them less susceptible to the fear, or simply more adept at rationalizing their transgressions. So, while the pyramid texts stand as a magnificent testament to ancient Egyptian beliefs and a fascinating early form of intellectual property protection, as a practical death trap, their effectiveness was, shall we say, less than divine. As we transition into the Middle Kingdom, roughly 2055 to 1650 BCE, you'll notice a subtle yet significant shift in burial trends. The colossal, sky-piercing pyramids of Giza, they're out. Well, mostly. Kings still built pyramids, but they were often smaller, made of mud brick, and cased in limestone, making them far less durable and more susceptible to decay than their granite predecessors. Why the change? Partly resource management, partly a realization that these massive targets were just too obvious. But this decline in pyramid grandeur didn't mean a decline in ingenuity. Quite the opposite. As the pyramids got smaller, the art of tomb security soared to new, cunning heights. It was less about brute force and more about subtle deception, a game of cat and mouse played with even more sophisticated rules. The Middle Kingdom was a period of reunification and consolidation after a period of decentralization and civil strife. While the kings still desired monumental tombs, the sheer expenditure and logistical nightmare of Old Kingdom pyramid building became unsustainable. Furthermore, the very visibility of the Giza pyramids had, ironically, made them prime targets. Smaller, more discreet pyramids, often with mud brick cores, became the norm. But the ingenuity previously poured into massive construction projects was now channeled into complex internal designs. The pharaohs and their architects learned from the past. They realized that sheer size was a magnet for trouble, and that perhaps a more subtle approach, a more intellectual challenge was needed. It was a strategic retreat from overt aggression to sophisticated, almost philosophical deception. The emphasis shifted from how big can we build it to how cleverly can we hide it. The Middle Kingdom saw a refinement of misdirection, a true mastery of now you see it, now you don't approach. Tombs during this period became infamous for their cleverly disguised entry points. Imagine an entire wall of a tomb chamber, beautifully decorated with hieroglyphs and vibrant scenes, looking perfectly solid. But behind a strategically placed sarcophagus, or nestled within a seemingly innocuous painted niche, lay a hidden passage, its entrance meticulously plastered and painted to blend seamlessly with the surrounding rock. Or perhaps the true entrance was an unassuming slab of stone within a floor, designed to pivot or slide, revealing a steep, descending shaft. These aren't overt traps. They are subtle deceptions, designed to fool the eye and frustrate the will. A tomb robber might spend days, weeks, even months chipping away at false walls, only to realize the real entrance was right under their nose, just slightly askew. One famous example from this period, though a noble's tomb rather than a king's, is the tomb of Wa and his wife at Lisht, discovered completely intact. The burial chamber was hidden beneath the floor of an offering chapel, accessible by a shaft that had been carefully filled and then concealed. Another technique involved digging a main shaft that went nowhere, while the actual burial chamber was accessed via a second, secret shaft branching off at a different level, disguised within the shaft filling itself. This required incredible precision and a deep understanding of how to make something appear ordinary when it was, in fact, extraordinary. The false entrances weren't just a physical barrier, they were a mental one, forcing intruders to waste time and effort, driving them to exasperation before they even got close to the real goods. It's the ancient version of a particularly frustrating hidden object game, only with very high stakes. So the emphasis dramatically shifted. It was no longer about sheer size, no longer about building an unmissable mountain of stone. The new strategy was all about cunning concealment and complex internal layouts. Think less giant fortress and more escape room meticulously designed by a maniacal genius. Tombs would feature bewildering arrays of corridors, deliberately confusing turns, and multiple dead ends. The idea was to make the tomb feel like a maze, to exhaust the robber physically and mentally before they ever even got close to the real treasure chamber. It was a strategy of attrition, a slow grind designed to wear down patience and break the spirit. The pharaohs were essentially saying, "All right, you can come in, but you're going to hate every single minute of it." This shift meant that tombs often became less about external grandeur and more about internal complexity. The tomb of Amenemhat III at Hawara, for example, known to classical writers as the Labyrinth, was said to have contained 3,000 rooms, half above ground and half below. While this is likely an exaggeration, it speaks to the reputation these Middle Kingdom tombs gained for their bewildering layouts. Imagine trying to navigate such a complex subterranean environment in absolute darkness, with only the dim flicker of an oil lamp, and knowing that every turn might be a dead end, every passage a trap. It was designed to induce maximum confusion and despair. The pharaohs weren't just building for their eternal rest, they were building for the eternal annoyance of anyone who dared to disturb them. A truly remarkable testament to passive-aggressive post-mortem planning. And here's a particularly nasty trick, a testament to the Middle Kingdom's dark ingenuity. Digging the burial chamber so deep that it would eventually fill with groundwater over millennia. Yes, you heard that right. Not only did they want to hide their treasures, they wanted to make sure that anyone who found them would have to become an ancient Egyptian scuba diver to retrieve them. Imagine breaking into a tomb, tunneling for weeks, and finally, your chisel punches through to what you think is the antechamber, only to be met with a gush of cold, murky, probably pathogen-ridden water. It creates a literal watery grave for looters, a boggy, suffocating chamber of despair. The water, of course, would also do its own damage, often eroding frescoes and soaking funerary goods. But for sheer, spiteful deterrence, it was brilliant. It's the ultimate, you almost got it, but nope moment, courtesy of a long-dead pharaoh and the natural hydraulics of the Nile Valley. You really have to admire their commitment to making life difficult, even for people who wouldn't be born for another 3,000 years. The tomb of Sesostris II at Lahoun is one such example. His burial chamber was dug so deep into the ground that it was below the water table, filling with water over time. This wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. For ancient robbers, such a discovery would have been a catastrophic blow, making access to the burial chamber incredibly difficult, if not impossible, with their rudimentary technology. For modern archaeologists, it presents immense challenges, requiring complex dewatering operations and specialized equipment. The water, while preserving some organic materials in unique ways, also causes immense damage to others, and makes excavation a slow, painstaking, and often quite disgusting process. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most effective trap is simply to let nature do its worst. The pharaohs understood that the forces of the earth could be just as formidable, if not more so, than any man-made barrier. All right, so we've moved on from the grand, albeit leaky, pyramids of the Middle Kingdom. Now we're in the New Kingdom, roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE, and the pharaohs have finally learned a crucial lesson. Building a giant, pointy, sparkling target on the horizon is perhaps not the most effective security strategy. It's like putting a giant X marks the spot on your treasure map. So they made a strategic decision. Forget the big pointy targets. We're going underground. We're going remote. We're going to a place that looks like a forgotten quarry, a desolate, sun-baked landscape of bearing rock where the only sound is the wind whistling past ancient stones and the occasional, deeply depressed jackal. This, my friends, is the Valley of the Kings. The transition from pyramids to rock-cut tombs was a direct response to the persistent problem of tomb robbery. The lessons from the Old and Middle Kingdoms were clear. Visible monuments, no matter how grand or internally complex, were simply too easy to find. The New Kingdom pharaohs, who ruled over an empire at its zenith of power and wealth, wanted something truly secure. They moved their burial ground away from the fertile plains of the Nile, where previous pyramids had stood, to the desolate, arid west bank of Thebes. This was a deliberate act of concealment, a strategic retreat from overt grandeur to subtle, subterranean secrecy. They wanted their tombs to blend into the natural landscape, to be almost invisible to the casual observer. It was the ultimate out-of-sight, out-of-mind strategy, a testament to their desperate desire for an undisturbed eternal rest. The Valley of the Kings, located on the west bank of the Nile near Luxor, was chosen for its rugged, isolated terrain. The idea was to blend into the barren landscape, making tombs less visible targets compared to those colossal, attention-grabbing pyramids. Instead of building up, they burrowed deep. They carved elaborate, multi-chambered tombs into the very bedrock of the Theban hills. From the outside, many of these tombs were designed to be as unassuming as possible, with simple, narrow entrances that could be easily hidden by rubble, rockfalls, or the sheer passage of time. It was the ultimate concealment strategy, an attempt to make the pharaohs' eternal resting places merge with the desert itself. What tomb? They wanted people to ask. Looks like just another dusty hillside to me. The geology of the Valley of the Kings was also a factor. The area is composed of a soft, workable limestone, making it relatively easy to excavate deep chambers and passages. However, interspersed within this soft limestone are layers of harder shale and other more brittle rocks, which could cause structural instability and potential collapse, another unintended trap. The entrances were often small, cut directly into the cliff face or at the base of a wadi. After the burial, these entrances would be meticulously filled with rubble, plaster, and natural rock debris, attempting to make them indistinguishable from the surrounding rock. It was a painstaking effort to erase all traces, to make the mountain itself swallow the secrets within. The goal was to create not just a tomb, but a natural, almost invisible fortress. But here's the problem: the eternally recurring fly in the ointment of ancient Egyptian security. They still needed a grand entrance. They still had to move massive sarcophagi, tons of funerary equipment, and dozens of people in and out during the burial. And all of that activity leaves traces. Plus, despite its remoteness, the valley quickly became known as the place where the kings were buried. It was no longer a secret. It was just a slightly less accessible target. So, even though they traded the visible monument for the hidden cave, the valley still became a magnet for looters, a giant geological treasure chest for anyone with the grit and determination to pry it open. It's like moving your valuable antiques into a self-storage unit in a remote desert location, only everyone in town still knows you keep your valuables there. The concept was sound. The execution, as always, proved less than foolproof against the relentless tide of human cupidity. The very act of burying a pharaoh was a massive undertaking. Hundreds, if not thousands, of workers, craftsmen, and priests would be involved in preparing the tomb, decorating it, and ultimately conducting the funeral procession. While efforts were made to keep the location secret, the sheer volume of activity, the movement of materials, and the presence of such a large workforce meant that the general area of the royal necropolis was an open secret. Furthermore, the knowledge of the tomb's locations, especially the general layout and security features, often leaked through the ranks of the very officials and workers meant to protect them. So, despite the remote location and the efforts at concealment, the valley became a beacon for organized crime, a known hunting ground for those desperate or daring enough to challenge the will of the gods and the might of the pharaoh. This shift presented a whole new set of security challenges. Protecting something inside a mountain, not just under one, required different types of traps, different forms of deception. You couldn't rely on the sheer mass of a pyramid anymore. Now it was about narrow corridors, precipitous drops, clever dead ends, and the subtle art of making a mountain disappear around a very large, very valuable corpse. It was a move from overt aggression to subtle psychological warfare, from monument to maze. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom were essentially saying, "All right, you want to steal our stuff? Come and get it. But you're going to have to tunnel your way through a mountain, probably fall into a pit, get lost several times, and maybe encounter a particularly grumpy cobra. Good luck." And so, the arms race continued, with the Valley of the Kings becoming the ultimate battleground for the eternal struggle between the dead and the very much alive. The rock-cut tombs of the New Kingdom favored long, descending corridors, often with multiple chambers, side rooms, and various blocking devices. The very act of carving into solid rock allowed for a new level of control over the internal layout. Architects could design twisting, turning passages, introduce false shafts, and create chambers that were easily overlooked. The challenge for the robber shifted from tunneling through a huge mound to navigating a complex, often dark and disorienting, subterranean labyrinth. These tombs were designed to disorient, to exhaust, and to delay, making the act of tomb robbery a painstaking, dangerous, and time-consuming endeavor. The pharaohs were no longer building obvious targets. They were building puzzles, and they expected anyone trying to solve them to pay a very high price indeed. All right, let's go spelunking. If you were a tomb robber, or, an archaeologist with a permit and a healthy dose of tetanus shots, approaching a typical Valley of the Kings tomb, you'd find a relatively unassuming entrance carved into the rock face. But once you stepped inside, the world would drop away. Literally. The typical structure involved a long, sloping corridor, often punctuated by steps or ramps, leading deep, deep into the bedrock. Imagine a subterranean tunnel, getting narrower, darker, and colder with every step, the air growing thick with the scent of ancient dust and the unspoken promises of untold riches. These aren't just hallways. They're psychological gauntlets, designed to disorient and intimidate, a deliberate descent into darkness and increasing claustrophobia. The typical layout of a New Kingdom royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings generally followed a pattern of 3 descending corridors, punctuated by 1 or 2 descending staircases. These passages would lead to an antechamber, often followed by a pillared hall, and finally, the burial chamber itself, deep within the mountain. The length and complexity varied from pharaoh to pharaoh, but the core design was a deep, linear progression into the earth. The temperature inside these tombs, even in the scorching desert, maintains a constant, cool temperature, creating an eerie stillness that only heightens the sense of being cut off from the living world. The air, heavy with dust and the scent of millennia, is dry and still, making every whisper, every rustle, every chip of a chisel echo with unsettling clarity. It's an environment designed to make you feel very small, very vulnerable, and very, very alone. One of the most common and physically formidable defenses in these rock-cut tombs were the stopper blocks. These were enormous, precisely cut stone plugs, often weighing several tons, designed to drop into place and seal corridors. They weren't usually triggered traps like the Grand Gallery blocks. Instead, they were lowered into position by the funeral party after the burial, and then sealed in place with mortar and rubble. Imagine a meticulously cut granite slab, 20 feet long and 10 feet high, perfectly wedged into a corridor, making it seem like the passage simply ended. To breach this, a robber wouldn't just need a chisel, they'd need to tunnel around it. A painstaking, weeks-long effort through solid rock, all in oppressive darkness. It was the ancient Egyptian version of a vault door, but made of raw, unyielding mountain. These stopper blocks were deployed at various points within the tomb, often after key chambers or at the entrance to the burial chamber itself. They were massive, carefully shaped blocks of limestone or granite, sometimes reinforced with wooden beams. The process of installing them after the burial would have been an incredibly complex and dangerous operation, requiring immense manpower and precision to lower the blocks into position and then mortar them into place. Once sealed, they created a seemingly impenetrable barrier, designed to give any would-be robber a truly monumental headache. It wasn't just about moving the block. It was about doing so without being detected, without making too much noise, and without causing a collapse. It was a physical challenge of epic proportions, designed to make the robber earn every single piece of stolen gold. Now, for something a bit more abrupt. Many tombs featured what archaeologists affectionately, or perhaps sarcastically, called the robber's pit. This was a deep, often camouflaged shaft, sometimes 20-30 feet deep, dug directly across a main corridor. Its purpose was dual: to deter intruders by creating an impassable gap, and to cause injury or even death to anyone foolish enough to stumble into it in the dark. Imagine crawling through a passage, your lamp sputtering, and suddenly the floor isn't there. You plunge into darkness, perhaps landing on jagged rocks, or worse, on a collection of very sharp, very ancient, possibly poisoned spikes. It was a brutal physical trap, a testament to the pharaohs' willingness to get a little medieval on anyone messing with their afterlife. The pits were often located after the first or second descending corridor, at a point where a robber might assume they were making good progress. They were designed to be unexpected, a sudden, terrifying void in the perceived path. Some theories even suggest that the pits might have been covered with a thin layer of rubble or plaster, camouflaging their true depth until an unsuspecting foot broke through. The psychological impact would have been immense. The sudden fall, the disorientation, the injury, and the terrifying realization of being trapped deep within the earth. It was a brutal physical expression of the pharaoh's wrath, a literal drop into despair. For the pharaohs, it was a perfectly justifiable measure to protect their eternal possessions. For the robbers, it was just another occupational hazard, one that often ended quite badly. But here's the darkly comedic, deeply ironic twist. Robbers often used these very pits to their advantage. Instead of being deterred or injured, resourceful thieves would sometimes use the pits as convenient places to coil their ropes, stash their tools, or even as a base for tunneling around the pit itself. If you're going to dig a big hole in a tomb, the thinking went, it might as well be useful. So what was intended as a deadly deterrent often became an inadvertent aid for the very criminals it was meant to stop. It's like building a moat around your castle, only to find the invaders have turned it into a swimming pool. You can almost hear the pharaohs groaning from beyond the grave. Are you kidding me? We give them a pit of despair, and they turn it into a storage locker? This is why we can't have nice things in the afterlife. This adaptability of ancient robbers is truly remarkable. They were not just brute force criminals. They were clever, resourceful, and incredibly persistent. Faced with a seemingly impassable pit, they would immediately seek a workaround. If the pit was too wide to jump, they might build a temporary bridge, or use their ropes to rappel down one side and climb up the other, carefully navigating the treacherous drop. The pit became a strategic point, a momentary delay, but rarely an absolute barrier for the most determined. It's a testament to human ingenuity on both sides of the grave. The pharaohs designed a magnificent trap, but the robbers, with their lives and livelihoods on the line, simply found a way to repurpose it. It's a classic example of an unintended consequence, a darkly amusing twist in the eternal game of cat and mouse. All right, let's talk about Pharaoh Seti I, ruler of the New Kingdom, and his tomb, KV-17, in the Valley of the Kings. This isn't just a tomb, it's a subterranean masterpiece, a labyrinthine nightmare that stretched the boundaries of ancient Egyptian engineering and paranoia. KV-17 is, quite simply, one of the longest and most complex tombs ever discovered in the valley, plunging an incredible 137 meters, over 450 feet, into the bedrock. It's a sprawling, decorated, subterranean palace, a testament to Seti's power and his absolutely pathological desire to keep his afterlife bling safe. Forget simple corridors. This tomb is a journey, a winding, twisting, descending odyssey into the Earth's belly, and quite possibly into madness. KV-17, also known as Belzoni's tomb, after its discoverer Giovanni Battista Belzoni in 1817, is celebrated not just for its immense length, but for the exquisite quality of its decorations. The reliefs and paintings, still remarkably preserved in many sections, depict stunning scenes of Seti I's journey through the underworld, his interaction with deities, and the rituals ensuring his eternal life. But beneath this artistic grandeur lay a highly complex and deliberate design intended to confuse and deter. It wasn't just a beautiful resting place, it was a physical and psychological gauntlet. Imagine the sheer effort required to excavate such a vast, intricate network of passages and chambers deep within the mountain, and then to decorate every single surface with such meticulous detail. It was an undertaking of epic proportions, driven by a pharaoh's unwavering commitment to both his eternal glory and his eternal security. What made Seti I's tomb such a nightmare for intruders, and, let's be honest, probably for the funeral party? Its deliberately confusing design. We're talking multiple sharp turns, 90-degree angles that would make a seasoned navigator pull their hair out. Changes in direction, sometimes doubling back on itself, just to make you think you were going the wrong way. And a dizzying succession of descending corridors, ramps, and staircases, each leading deeper, each making you question if you were ever going to see daylight again. It wasn't just about blocking a path. It was about disorienting, bewildering, and exhausting anyone who dared to venture inside. Imagine trying to carry a heavy, gilded sarcophagus through that obstacle course. It must have been an absolute nightmare for the ancient pallbearers, let alone a team of clandestine robbers trying to operate in the dead of night. The typical straight, linear approach of earlier tombs was abandoned in favor of a serpentine, almost illogical progression. The architects of KV-17 clearly understood the psychological impact of disorientation. In the pitch blackness, with only a flickering lamp, the constant changes in direction would quickly erode any sense of bearing. It's like navigating a funhouse maze, only the walls are solid rock and there are no easy exits. This design would force robbers to move slowly, cautiously, constantly reorienting themselves, increasing their chances of detection or simply giving up in frustration. And for the funeral party, it would have been an incredibly arduous journey, a solemn procession that was also a literal physical endurance test. Every twist, every turn, every descending ramp added to the sense of mystery and menace that permeated the tomb. But the real stroke of genius, the true mark of Seti I's cunning, was the famous missing passage. About halfway through the tomb, the main corridor suddenly appeared to end, blocked by a perfectly smooth, plastered-over wall, painted to blend seamlessly with the surrounding decoration. It looked utterly convincing, a definitive dead end. For centuries, it remained hidden, but deep behind that false wall, another passage continued, descending even further into the bedrock. This wasn't just a blocked passage. It was an entire section of the tomb filled in, plastered over, and decorated to create a false facade, leading to a hidden extension that contained more chambers and a lower burial hall. It was a commitment to deception that bordered on the absurd, an entire architectural sleight of hand designed to make intruders think they had reached the end, when in reality, the real journey was just beginning. This missing passage was discovered by Belzoni himself, who noticed a subtle difference in the plasterwork. He carefully removed the false wall to reveal a descending staircase that led to an entirely new section of the tomb, including a large pillared hall and, eventually, the magnificent burial chamber containing Seti I's sarcophagus. This level of meticulous deception is breathtaking. It required immense effort, not only to excavate the hidden passage, but also to meticulously fill, plaster, and decorate the false wall to make it utterly convincing. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a secret basement that you access by pulling a hidden book on a bookshelf, only on a much grander, more labor-intensive scale. The false wall wasn't just a barrier, It was a grand act of architectural prestidigitation, designed to make thieves believe they had reached the end of their search, only to discover the true journey was just beginning. This, my friends, highlights the sheer audacity of ancient Egyptian deception. They weren't just building structures, they were crafting elaborate illusions, playing mind games with future generations. The incredible effort and cunning involved in these subterranean puzzles, the precise measurements, the skilled stonework, the meticulous plastering and painting, all for the sole purpose of fooling some desperate, dust-covered bandit. It wasn't enough to simply bury the king. They had to make it an intellectual challenge, a test of will and navigational skill. And in the case of Seti I's serpentine sanctuary, they really outdid themselves. You almost have to applaud the pharaoh for his dedication to making everyone's life harder, even after his own demise. It's a level of commitment to post-mortem annoyance that truly transcends millennia. The architects and builders of Seti I's tomb understood that the human eye, particularly in dimly lit, stressful conditions, could be easily fooled. They exploited this vulnerability with masterful precision, creating an environment that was both physically demanding and psychologically frustrating. The sheer volume of labor and resources poured into these deceptions is astonishing. It speaks to a deep-seated paranoia, an almost pathological desire to outsmart every conceivable threat. Seti, I wanted his tomb to be not just a resting place, but a legend, a place so notoriously difficult to breach that future generations would simply give up. And while it was eventually robbed, the sheer complexity and the famous missing passage secured its place in history as one of the greatest examples of ancient Egyptian tomb security theater, a masterpiece of magnificent futility. Now, let's talk about Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great, one of Egypt's most famous and long-reigning pharaohs. When you're Ramesses II, you don't just get a tomb, you get a sprawling, magnificent subterranean palace. His own tomb, KV7, is a prime example of New Kingdom grandeur, vast and extensively decorated. But perhaps even more fascinating, and certainly more complex from a security perspective, is KV5, the tomb of his numerous sons. Yes, Ramesses II was a prolific pharaoh, not just in building monuments, but also in, shall we say, expanding his family. And when you have over 50 sons and numerous daughters, though their burials are less well known, you need more than just a family plot. You need a subterranean necropolis, a royal retreat for an entire generation. Ramesses II ruled for an astonishing 66 years, from 1279 to 1213 BCE, a period of immense prosperity and monumental construction. He was a pharaoh who believed in making a grand statement, both in life and in death. His own tomb, KV7, is one of the largest royal tombs in the valley, boasting multiple pillared halls, descending corridors, and a magnificent burial chamber. It was designed to reflect his immense power and ensure his glorious passage to the afterlife. But it's KV5, the tomb for his sons, that truly highlights a unique security challenge. To accommodate such a vast royal progeny, a completely new approach was needed. It wasn't just a single tomb. It was an entire underground community, a sprawling catacomb that would require a truly unprecedented level of architectural planning and, by extension, defensive considerations. The discovery and exploration of KV5 has been an archaeological marvel. For centuries, it was largely buried under debris, thought to be just another minor tomb. But with persistent excavation, it revealed itself to be a vast, multi-chambered catacomb, one of the largest tombs in the Valley of the Kings. We're talking about a central pillared hall from which numerous corridors branch off, leading to dozens of side chambers, over 150 identified so far, with more potentially still hidden. Each of these chambers was likely intended for the burial of one or more of Ramesses II's royal progeny. It's a sprawling, bewildering complex, a veritable underground city for the dead, designed to house an entire royal dynasty. Imagine trying to map this place, let alone secure it. It's less a tomb and more a subterranean housing development with extremely high stakes. The sheer scale of KV5 is mind-boggling. Discovered by James Burton in 1825, its true extent wasn't realized until the 1990s, when Kent Weeks and his team began extensive excavations. They uncovered a vast network of corridors and chambers arranged in a grid-like pattern around a central hall. The tomb's design is almost overwhelming in its complexity, a honeycomb of subterranean rooms and passages. It was a logistical marvel to construct, and an even greater logistical nightmare to secure. Each of the many sons, presumably buried with their own funerary goods, presented a fresh target for robbers. This wasn't just one prize, it was dozens, spread across an intricate underground labyrinth. It's a testament to Ramesses II's prolific fatherhood and his equally prolific desire to secure the eternal rest of his dynasty, even if that meant building an entire underground city just for his offspring. This presented a unique challenge in terms of security. How do you protect a multi-chambered tomb housing an entire royal generation, each with their own set of valuables? The sheer number of potential entry points, the vastness of the internal space, and the sheer volume of precious goods meant that conventional single point of failure traps simply wouldn't suffice. You couldn't just seal one corridor. You needed a system of internal barriers, false doors, and diversions for dozens of chambers. Each son, presumably, had his own set of funerary treasures, making every corridor a potential target. It was like trying to secure a sprawling, multi-tenant apartment complex. Only everyone's apartment is full of gold, and the tenants are all dead, and you have to worry about ancient Egyptian burglars. The logistics alone must have been a pharaoh's nightmare. The security challenge for KV5 was compounded by its very purpose. Instead of one heavily fortified burial chamber, you had over 100. This meant a decentralized security approach was needed, with each chamber potentially having its own seals and blocking mechanisms, or a centralized system of general deterrence throughout the complex. Robbers, upon breaching the main entrance, would then face a bewildering array of choices, each corridor a potential path to new riches or a new dead end. It was a treasure hunt on an epic scale, a challenge that would require immense time, resources, and patience. The architects were essentially designing an open-world video game where the objective was loot and the enemies were ancient curses and falling rocks. It was a bold experiment in mass royal burial and an even bolder experiment in mass royal security. And then Mother Nature decided to get in on the tomb-trapping action. The Valley of the Kings, despite being a desert, is prone to sudden, violent flash floods during infrequent heavy rains. These events would send torrents of water and debris cascading down the wadis, dry riverbeds, often directly into the entrances of the tombs. KV5, with its deep, sprawling network of chambers, was particularly susceptible. Over millennia, it became largely filled with layers of mud, silt, and rock brought in by these floods. This, ironically, became nature's own trap. While destructive in many ways, burying and sealing the tomb, it also inadvertently preserved some of its contents from human looters. The thick layers of mud acted as a natural, unbreachable barrier, a watery, earthy portcullis that kept many of its secrets, and a lot of its damage, hidden for thousands of years. So even when human ingenuity failed, the capricious wrath of the weather occasionally stepped in to provide an utterly unintentional, yet highly effective, form of security. Ramesses II probably didn't plan for a flood to protect his sons, but hey, you take what you can get in the afterlife. The regular flooding of KV5 meant that its chambers and corridors became packed solid with sediment, effectively sealing them off. While this caused significant damage to decorations and many artifacts, it also protected the tomb from more thorough looting. Robbers might have made initial forays, but the sheer volume of mud and debris would have deterred extensive long-term plundering. For archaeologists like Kent Weeks, the excavation of KV5 was not just about finding artifacts, but about removing thousands of tons of flood-deposited material, a grueling and complex task. It's a powerful reminder that the natural environment is a constant, often unpredictable, factor in the preservation and destruction of ancient sites. Ramesses II built a tomb for 50 sons, and nature added a few hundred tons of mud as an extra security feature. It's a collaborative effort between the dead king, his architects, and the elements, with strangely mixed results. All right, let's talk about a classic piece of ancient Egyptian tomb trickery, the false door. These weren't actual doors, mind you, with working hinges or secret latches. Oh no. These were meticulously carved illusions, elaborate representations of doors, complete with lintels, jambs, and sometimes even the illusion of wooden planks or bolts, all rendered in exquisite detail on solid rock or within a wall of the tomb. They were often adorned with offering scenes and prayers, looking utterly convincing, utterly inviting, utterly promising. You'd see one, and your looter's heart would sing, "Aha, the entrance, the secret chamber." But you'd be wrong. So wrong. The false door, known in ancient Egyptian as Sekhet Hetepu, was a symbolic gateway between the living and the dead, allowing the ka of the deceased to pass through to receive offerings. They were often found in the chapels of mastabas, or carved into the walls of rock-cut tombs, strategically placed on the western wall, facing the setting sun and the land of the dead. But their religious function also had an unintended, or perhaps intended, defensive purpose. Because they looked so convincingly like a real entry point, complete with all the expected architectural details of a door, they were perfect for fooling anyone who didn't understand their symbolic nature. A robber, seeing such a detailed and prominent door, would naturally assume it led to something important, and they would be entirely mistaken, wasting valuable time and effort on a solid rock wall. The primary goal of these decoy doors was pure psychological warfare. They were designed to frustrate, to exhaust, and most importantly, to waste precious time. Imagine being a tomb robber, tunneling for weeks, breaking through stone, anticipating the ultimate prize. You finally breach a passage, you crawl your way into this grand chamber, heart pounding with anticipation, and it's empty. Just a dusty room, smelling of stale air and crushed dreams. The sheer psychological impact of such a discovery would be immense. You'd be demoralized, you'd be questioning your life choices, and you'd have wasted precious time and effort. It's the ancient equivalent of a bait-and-switch, a cosmic prank played by a dead king on anyone foolish enough to try and steal his afterlife slippers. In the dark, with limited light, and under immense pressure, distinguishing a true, carefully sealed entrance from a meticulously carved false door would have been incredibly difficult. The robbers would chip away, slowly, painstakingly, believing they were making progress, only to hit solid, unyielding rock. This would not only deplete their physical energy, but also their mental resilience. Each failed attempt, each false lead, would chip away at their motivation, increasing the chances that they might give up altogether. It's a strategy that relies on the robber's initial hopes and then systematically dismantles them, piece by painstaking piece. The pharaohs were not just building physical barriers, they were building mental ones, designed to break the will of their adversaries through sheer, unadulterated frustration. This was the ultimate insult, a truly passive-aggressive move from beyond the grave. Spending hours chipping through solid rock, muscles aching, lungs filling with dust, only to discover that the pharaoh has fooled you with a beautifully rendered illusion. It's like being invited to a lavish banquet, only to find the table is laden with plastic food. It mocks your efforts, highlights your futility, and ensures that even if you eventually find the real entrance, you'll arrive exhausted, demoralized, and thoroughly annoyed. It's a testament to the pharaoh's dark sense of humor, a final sarcastic gesture from their mummified hand. They might be dead, but they could still deliver a supreme eye roll of disapproval. The sheer audacity of it is what makes it so darkly comedic. To dedicate such craftsmanship, such artistic skill, to something utterly useless from a functional perspective, purely for the purpose of deception. It's an act of supreme confidence in their ability to manipulate human perception. And the robbers, of course, were the unwitting audience for this elaborate, millennia-spanning theatrical performance. Imagine the moment of realization, the chisel finally breaking through, the dust clearing, and instead of a hidden passage, just more solid stone. The disappointment would be crushing, the feeling of having been thoroughly, utterly outsmarted by a dead person, almost unbearable. It's a genius move, really, leveraging human expectation against itself. The pharaohs were masters of the art of the prank, played out across the ages. Honestly, you have to hand it to the pharaohs. Their passive-aggressive afterlife strategies were legendary. Oh, you want my gold? Fine, come and get it. But first, let me make you chip through 6 feet of solid rock just to reach a wall that isn't actually a door. Enjoy! And maybe bring a snack. It's going to be a while. It's a genius move, really, leveraging human expectation against itself. The robbers, fueled by their own greed and the promise of a quick score, would fall for it every time. They were so conditioned to look for grand entrances, for visible pathways, that the pharaohs could simply paint one on the wall and watch the chaos unfold. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of putting a fake pole sticker on a push door, only the consequences are far more dusty and demoralizing. Truly, a masterpiece of frustration. And the beauty of the false door as a trap is its cost-effectiveness. It required skilled artisans, yes, but not the immense logistical effort of moving massive granite blocks or excavating complex labyrinths. It was a low-tech, high-impact psychological weapon. It exploited the very human tendency to follow obvious signs, to believe what one sees. And it worked, at least in frustrating robbers for significant periods of time. The pharaohs were masters of subtle manipulation, understanding that sometimes the best way to guard your treasures isn't with brute force, but with a clever lie. So, the next time you see a beautifully decorated wall in a tomb, perhaps take a moment to admire the artistry, but also to consider the potential for profound, age-old deception lurking just beneath the surface. All right, we've talked about false doors and pits, but now let's get to the heavy hitters, the true brute force of ancient Egyptian tomb security, the portcullis. This wasn't just a block of stone. This was the ultimate physical trap. A massive, thick stone slab, often made of granite, designed to drop into place with terrifying speed and seal a passage with definitive, crushing finality. Imagine a perfectly smooth, vertically grooved slot carved into the walls of a passage, and waiting above it, poised precariously, is a slab weighing anywhere from 10 to 50 tons. When this thing came down, it wasn't just sealing a tomb. It was creating an unyielding, impenetrable barrier, a solid wall where, moments before, there was an open pathway. The concept of the portcullis, a heavy grating or gate that slides down vertically, has been used in fortifications for millennia, from ancient Egypt to medieval castles. But the Egyptian version, particularly in the pyramids, was on an entirely different scale. We're talking about slabs of hard granite, meticulously cut and polished, designed to fit perfectly into slots carved with astounding precision. The sheer size and weight of these blocks meant that once they were lowered, they were virtually impossible to lift or bypass without immense effort and highly specialized techniques that ancient robbers simply didn't possess. It was a statement of absolute physical finality, designed to be a definitive no-entry sign that could not be argued with, only endured. So, how did these terrifying behemoths work? The ingenuity was surprisingly simple, yet terrifyingly effective. The portcullis blocks were typically held in place by ropes and perhaps counterweights, or simply by temporary wooden props. After the burial ceremony was complete and the funeral procession made its retreat from the inner sanctum, the last priests out would trigger the mechanism. This could involve cutting a rope, pulling a lever, or kicking away a crucial wooden support. With a groan of stone on stone, a rush of air, and a thunderous crash, the enormous slab would drop down, sliding perfectly into its prepared slot, often resting on a solid stone sill at the bottom. Once in place, it was usually cemented or mortared in, making it virtually impossible to lift or move without immense effort. It was a one-shot, permanent solution, a definitive game over for anyone trying to get past it. The deployment of a portcullis was a crucial, high-stakes part of the tomb sealing ritual. It required meticulous planning and execution to ensure the block descended smoothly and fully without getting jammed or stuck. The sound alone, a reverberating thunderclap in the confined space of a pyramid corridor, must have been chilling. It was the definitive punctuation mark on the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife, an acoustic declaration of finality. And for any robbers who managed to reach such a block, the sight of tons of solid granite sealing their path must have been profoundly disheartening. It was a barrier that physically embodied the pharaoh's unwavering desire for eternal peace, a massive stone middle finger to any would-be intruders. But here's the kicker. The darkly comedic element that makes this trap so intriguing, it was almost as dangerous for the funeral party as it was for any future robbers. Imagine being the last priest exiting the tomb, having just triggered the mechanism. You had to be incredibly quick, incredibly precise, and possess nerves of steel to avoid being trapped, or, worse, crushed yourself. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, one frayed rope breaking prematurely, and you'd be flattened into a very unfortunate historical footnote. You'd be forever enshrined, not as a pious attendant, but as the pharaoh's last, inadvertent bodyguard. It's like designing a sophisticated security system for your house, but the front door is designed to instantly collapse and trap anyone who exits too slowly. The pharaohs clearly prioritized their eternal possessions over the mortal well-being of their staff. Such is the way of absolute power. The pressure on the individuals responsible for deploying these portcullises would have been immense. Not only was their own life on the line, but a mistake could also compromise the sanctity of the pharaoh's tomb, a cosmic disaster. The speed and precision required, in the dim light of oil lamps, with the echoes of the funeral procession fading, must have been terrifying. It's a vivid image of the ultimate commitment to a job, or perhaps just a profound fear of displeasing a dead pharaoh. And for the ancient tomb robbers who eventually bypassed this system, imagine the effort involved in digging around those immense blocks, or, as some speculate, entering through a lower, undiscovered passage. The portcullis was a masterpiece of deadly engineering, a testament to the pharaoh's willingness to go to extreme lengths, even at the cost of their own staff, to secure their post-mortem treasures. And yet, despite the sheer force and finality of these portcullises, the ingenuity of ancient robbers often found a way. They couldn't lift them, they couldn't smash them, not easily anyway. So what did they do? They tunneled. Often, they would chip away at the ceiling just above the slot where the portcullis dropped, creating enough space to squeeze over the top. Or, if the rock permitted, they would tunnel around the side of the slot, bypassing the massive block entirely. It took time, immense effort, and incredible patience. But where there's a will to plunder, there's usually a way. So the ultimate physical trap, designed to be impenetrable, often became little more than a challenging detour for a determined crew with a chisel and a deep-seated desire for shiny things. Again, the eternal lesson. No security system is truly foolproof, especially against a truly motivated individual. The resourcefulness of ancient tomb robbers is truly astonishing. They weren't just brute force criminals. They were often highly skilled, patient, and methodical. Faced with a massive, immovable granite block, they didn't give up. Instead, they adapted. Tunneling around such an obstacle would have been an incredibly arduous task, requiring days or weeks of continuous labor in cramped, dark conditions, all while maintaining absolute secrecy. It's a testament to the powerful allure of the treasures within and the sheer desperation that drove these individuals. The portcullis, a symbol of ultimate security, ultimately became a testament to the unyielding determination of those who sought to breach it. It's a darkly humorous paradox. The pharaohs designed the ultimate barrier, and the robbers created the ultimate workaround. All right, let's talk about pits. Not the kind you get in Peaches, but the kind you get in ancient Egyptian tombs. Specifically, the kind that gravity enthusiastically helped the pharaohs deploy. These actual pits were deep shafts, often 20 to 30 feet deep, sometimes even more, dug into the floor of a passage or chamber. Their consequences were dire: a long, unpleasant, bone-jarring drop into darkness. And these weren't always just empty holes. Some, particularly in more paranoid designs, are speculated to have contained jagged rocks, broken pottery shards, or, in the truly nightmarish scenarios, even spikes. Imagine tumbling into that, landing amidst ancient debris, your leg twisted, your lamp broken, and the exit a distant, impossible glimmer above. It's the ultimate no-entry sign, enforced by the laws of physics and the sheer malevolence of a dead king. These pits were typically located after the initial entrance and descending corridors, at a point where intruders might feel a false sense of security, believing they had bypassed the initial defenses. The suddenness of the drop, coupled with the absolute darkness, assuming a robber's lamp was knocked out, would be disorienting and terrifying. Injuries would be almost guaranteed: broken bones, concussions, severe cuts from the fall or landing on sharp objects. And then comes the agonizing wait. How do you get out of a 30-foot deep pit, in the dark, possibly injured, and all alone? It was a truly brutal trap, designed to not just deter, but to eliminate. The Pharaohs were not messing around. They understood that sometimes a good, old-fashioned, gravity-assisted fall was the most effective way to protect their eternal slumber. But the Egyptians, masters of psychological warfare, also employed false pits. These were pits designed not to actually harm or trap you, but to make you think there was danger, forcing caution and slowing your progress without actual physical harm. Perhaps a shallow pit that only gave a minor scare, or a pit that appeared deeper than it was due to clever angling or strategically placed shadows. The goal here was to create uncertainty, to make the robber paranoid about every step, every shadow. Is this a real pit or a fake pit designed to make me second-guess myself? The agony of choice. This constant mental friction, the need to test every inch of ground, would significantly slow down the plundering process. It's like playing a video game where every other step is a trap, only you don't have a save point. The false pit was a brilliant, low-cost, high-impact psychological weapon. It exploited the natural human fear of falling and the paranoia of navigating a dark, unknown environment. A robber, having already encountered the real dangers of a tomb, would be hyper-vigilant. A carefully constructed false pit, perhaps just a few feet deep, but appearing bottomless in the dim light, would force them to spend precious time and effort securing ropes, testing the ground, or finding alternative routes. This cumulative effect of constant caution and wasted effort would wear down their resolve, increasing the chances of them giving up or being detected. It was a classic mind game, a testament to the Pharaoh's understanding that sometimes the threat of danger is just as effective as the danger itself. The truly insidious thing about these pits was their camouflage. They weren't just obvious holes in the ground. Oh no. That would be too simple. Pits were often disguised, covered with thin layers of plaster, rubble, or carefully placed wooden boards designed to collapse under weight. Imagine walking across what appears to be a perfectly solid floor, perhaps decorated with paintings of smiling deities, only for it to suddenly give way beneath you. One moment you're admiring the artistry, The next, you're plummeting into the abyss. This required incredible skill from the builders, ensuring the disguise was perfect, blending seamlessly with the surrounding environment. It's the ancient Egyptian version of a tripwire, only instead of falling over, you're falling into a very deep, very dark hole. The art of camouflaging these pits was a meticulous craft. Builders would take pains to ensure the covering blended perfectly with the surrounding floor, using matching materials and careful finishing. For a robber operating in low light, potentially disoriented by the tomb's other features, such a disguised pit would be almost impossible to detect before it was too late. It was a trap that literally pulled the rug out from under you, a sudden, terrifying betrayal of solid ground. The psychological impact of such a surprise would be immense, eroding trust in the very stability of the tomb itself. It's a chilling reminder that in an ancient Egyptian tomb, even the floor beneath your feet could be actively working against you. Combine these pits, both real and false, with the decoy doors, the winding corridors, the massive stopper blocks, and the general air of claustrophobic dread, and what you have is an ancient Egyptian tomb designed to be a profoundly annoying obstacle course. It wasn't just a physical challenge, it was a test of patience, a trial of nerve, and a marathon of tedious traversal for anyone not meant to be there. Every step was fraught with potential peril, every turn a potential dead end, every wall a potential deception. The pharaohs didn't just want to keep you out, they wanted to make the attempt to get in so utterly miserable that you'd rather spend your time doing, well, literally anything else. It's a dark comedy of frustration, a testament to the idea that sometimes the best defense is simply to be profoundly, excruciatingly annoying. And in that, the pharaohs truly excelled. Imagine the sheer mental and physical toll of navigating such an environment. The constant vigilance, the fear of the unknown, the back-breaking labor, the flickering light, the stale air. It all compounded into an experience designed to break even the most hardened individual. The pharaohs were not just building traps. They were building an immersive, multi-sensory experience of utter misery for anyone who dared to intrude. It was a genius, if somewhat sadistic, approach to security, recognizing that sometimes the best way to protect your treasures is to make the act of stealing them so profoundly unpleasant that no amount of gold seems worth the effort. And in this particular form of psychological warfare, the pharaohs were truly masters. All right, let's pivot from tangible granite blocks and bottomless pits to something a little more ethereal, something that has haunted our collective imagination for a century, starring in countless horror movies and pulp novels. I'm talking about the mummy's curse. It's undoubtedly the most famous trap associated with ancient Egyptian tombs. But here's the kicker. It's also arguably the least effective as an actual designed security measure. Because, well, it largely wasn't designed at all. It was more of an accidental viral marketing campaign for the macabre, a brand built on sensationalism and a touch of genuine mystery. The mummy's curse is a triumph of popular culture over historical accuracy. The ancient Egyptians did, as we've discussed, incorporate curses into their tomb texts, often appealing to deities to protect the deceased and punish desecrators. But these were generally not curses in the modern, dramatic sense, No instant death rays, no reanimated corpses, no lingering supernatural malaise designed to specifically target grave robbers. The idea of a generalized, malevolent curse clinging to a tomb, bringing death and misfortune to anyone who disturbs it, is largely a modern invention, fueled by early 20th century media sensationalism and public fascination with the exotic allure of ancient Egypt. It's a fantastic story, absolutely, but as a practical security system, not so much. The origins of the mummy's curse lie not in ancient Egyptian engineering manuals, but squarely in the sensationalist headlines of the early 20th century. When Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the world was gripped by Egyptomania. And when Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer of the expedition, died shortly after the tomb's opening, the nascent tabloid press smelled blood and a fantastic story. The idea of a malevolent supernatural force protecting the pharaoh's rest was too good to resist. It was a perfect storm of scientific ignorance. At the time, little was known about ancient pathogens or molds, genuine mystery surrounding ancient rituals, and a dash of good old-fashioned media hype. Suddenly, every sneeze, every illness, every unfortunate accident suffered by anyone even remotely connected to the tomb was attributed to the curse. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was an unprecedented media event. The world was hungry for details, and the press, ever eager for a captivating narrative, quickly latched on to any unusual occurrence. Lord Carnarvon's death, just 5 months after the tomb's opening, provided the perfect fodder. The fact that the lights in Cairo reportedly went out at the exact moment of his death, or that his dog howled and died simultaneously in England, only added to the dramatic narrative, though these details are likely apocryphal. Journalists like Arthur Weigall of the Daily Mail actively promoted the curse theory, capitalizing on the public's fascination with the exotic and the macabre. It was excellent marketing, turning a scientific expedition into a real-life horror story. The power of narrative, it turns out, can be far more potent than any actual ancient trap. So, you have Lord Carnarvon, bitten by a mosquito, shaving over the bite, getting blood poisoning, and dying. This, according to the newspapers, was proof positive of the curse. The press went wild. Even Arthur Conan Doyle, yes, the Sherlock Holmes guy, suggested a spiritual cause. More deaths followed, often just elderly people dying of natural causes, but the narrative was set. The curse became a terrifying, irresistible force. Never mind that Howard Carter, the man who actually entered the tomb first and spent the most time in it, lived for another 17 years, dying peacefully of Hodgkin's lymphoma at the age of 64. His longevity never made for good copy. The hysteria reached fever pitch, cementing the mummy's curse as an indelible part of pop culture, a chilling warning to all who dare disturb the sleep of kings. The media frenzy was so intense that even relatively minor ailments or accidents among the expedition members or their associates were immediately attributed to the curse. The public wanted a thrilling, mystical explanation, not mundane medical realities. The fact that many individuals associated with the discovery lived long and healthy lives was conveniently overlooked. Howard Carter, the man most deserving of the curse by proximity and activity, lived a full life, dying of natural causes decades later. But his survival didn't fit the narrative. The mummy's curse became a self-fulfilling prophecy in the public imagination, a powerful myth that continues to resonate today. It's a fascinating case study in how a good story, repeated often enough, can completely overshadow the more mundane scientific truth. Now, let's inject a dose of mundane reality into this supernatural cocktail. While the idea of a curse is thrilling, the more prosaic explanations for illnesses and deaths associated with tomb excavations are, shall we say, significantly less exciting, but still pretty dark. We're talking about things like mold spores that have lain dormant for millennia, releasing toxic gases when disturbed. Ancient bacteria and fungi thriving in sealed, stale air. Dust, lots and lots of dust, carrying all sorts of irritants and pathogens. Or, as in Carnarvon's case, just bad luck and a nasty infection in a pre-antibiotic era. These are the real curses, biological time bombs and environmental hazards, silent killers lurking in the dark. So, while you might not be turned into a scarab beetle, you could very well contract a nasty respiratory infection or a fungal disease that makes you wish a scarab beetle would just finish you off. Still pretty dark, isn't it? Just less supernatural. The scientific reality of tomb hazards is, in its own way, far more chilling than any supernatural curse. Entering a sealed tomb is effectively entering a confined, oxygen-deprived space that has been a breeding ground for various microorganisms for thousands of years. Histoplasmosis, caused by inhaling spores from bat guano, is a genuine threat in many caves and ancient structures. The dust itself can contain crystalline silica, which can lead to silicosis, a debilitating lung disease. Furthermore, ancient organic materials can decay to produce toxic gases, and some speculate about dormant ancient pathogens. So while the curse might not magic, the very real biological and environmental hazards within ancient tombs are potent and often unseen threats, providing a very practical, if less dramatic, form of death trap. All right. So we've debunked the supernatural curse, but that doesn't mean ancient tombs weren't packing some serious, albeit unintended, biological warfare. These weren't traps intentionally placed by the pharaohs, no giant venomous scorpions magically summoned at the pull of a lever. Rather, these were the natural inhabitants, the ecosystems that flourished in dark, undisturbed environments, and they posed significant, very real dangers to anyone foolish enough to venture inside. Mother Nature, it turns out, was an excellent, if unwitting, co-conspirator in tomb security. And sometimes nature is far more terrifying than any ancient curse. The unique microclimates within ancient tombs, dark, cool, dry, and undisturbed for millennia, created perfect conditions for certain life forms to thrive. These weren't designed by architects or priests, but they became formidable, if unintentional, guardians. The pharaohs simply built their tombs and let the natural world take its course. And in many cases, nature delivered a powerful, if unsung, form of deterrence. It's a reminder that not all traps are man-made. Sometimes, the most effective security system is simply time, neglect, and the patient, relentless march of biological processes. And the consequences for the intruder, whether ancient robber or modern archaeologist, could be just as severe as any falling granite block. First up, let's talk bats. Lots and lots of bats. Tombs, with their deep, dark, cool, and secluded chambers, were ideal habitats for large colonies of bats. And where there are bats, there is guano. Lots and lots of guano. This isn't just unpleasant, it's a biohazard. Bat guano can harbor dangerous fungi like Histoplasma capsulatum, which causes histoplasmosis, a serious respiratory infection. Imagine working for hours in a confined space, breathing in aerosolized bat droppings. Not exactly a pleasant afternoon outing. And then there's the disorienting swarm. Disturb a large colony, and you're suddenly enveloped in a fluttering, screeching cloud of leathery wings, a terrifying sensory overload in pitch blackness, easily leading to disorientation, falls, or triggering panic. It's like having 1,000 tiny winged demons suddenly attack your face. Not fun. Histoplasmosis, the cave disease, is a very real threat in archaeological contexts. The spores of Histoplasma capsulatum thrive in soil contaminated with bat guano and bird droppings. When these spores are disturbed, they become airborne and can be inhaled, leading to a fungal infection that primarily affects the lungs. Symptoms can range from mild, flu-like illness to severe, life-threatening conditions. Symptoms can range from mild, flu-like illness to severe, life-threatening conditions. For ancient robbers, without modern medical knowledge or treatments, such an infection could easily be fatal. Beyond the disease, the sheer sensory assault of a disturbed bat colony is a significant deterrent. The sudden, chaotic movement, the high-pitched screeching, and the feeling of leathery wings brushing against your face in absolute darkness would be enough to send most people fleeing in terror. It's an effective, if utterly disgusting, form of biological protection. Then we have the creepy crawlies, the insects and arachnids that absolutely thrived in these undisturbed, dark environments. Spiders, scorpions, centipedes, and various other multi-legged nightmares. Many of these, particularly scorpions, are venomous and aggressive when disturbed. Imagine reaching into a dark crevice or stumbling over a loose stone, only to be met by the agonizing sting of a scorpion that's been happily residing there for centuries. In a confined space, far from medical help, a scorpion sting could be fatal, or at the very least, severely incapacitate a tomb robber. They were tiny, living booby traps, lurking in every shadow, every crack. The pharaohs didn't need to put a magic spell on them. They just needed to seal the tomb and let nature do its thing. Egypt is home to several species of venomous scorpions and spiders, some of which are highly dangerous. The dark, cool, and secluded environments of tombs provide ideal habitats for these creatures, allowing them to remain undisturbed for extended periods. For an ancient tomb robber, working in cramped conditions with limited visibility, the risk of encountering a venomous arachnid would have been constant. A scorpion sting, while not always fatal, would cause excruciating pain, swelling, and incapacitation, making escape or continued work impossible. In the absence of medical aid, secondary infections or severe reactions could easily prove deadly. These tiny living guardians represent a very real, very tangible threat, a silent army of venomous defenders, ensuring that even if you bypass the granite blocks, you might still face a painful, ignominious end. But perhaps the most insidious, the most truly terrifying biological warfare came from the unseen threats, fungi and bacteria. Sealed tombs, with their stale air, constant humidity, and lack of light, created perfect breeding grounds for ancient mold spores, bacteria, and other microorganisms. When a tomb was finally breached after millennia, these dormant organisms would be exposed to fresh air, often becoming aerosolized. Inhaling these spores could lead to severe respiratory infections, lung diseases, and various other debilitating illnesses. Think about it. You're breathing in the very air that has been trapped for thousands of years, permeated with the decay of organic material, the dust of the dead, and the silent proliferation of microscopic life. This wasn't some theatrical curse from a movie. This was a very real, very dangerous health risk, a truly silent killer that could fell an archaeologist or a robber long after they thought they had escaped the tomb's clutches. So, while there might not be a mummy's curse, there was definitely a fungus's curse, and that's arguably far more unsettling. The conditions within many sealed tombs, high humidity, lack of air circulation, and the presence of organic materials, mummies, wood, textiles, are ideal for the growth of various molds and bacteria. When these environments are disturbed, the spores and microbes become airborne. Inhaling these can cause a range of health issues. For robbers and early archaeologists, a lack of protective gear meant direct exposure. These silent killers work slowly, often causing chronic conditions that might not manifest until weeks or months after exposure, leading to the popular curse narrative. Modern archaeologists are acutely aware of these risks, employing respirators, ventilation systems, and stringent health protocols. But for ancient robbers, it was an invisible, insidious threat, a delayed action trap that could punish them long after they had made their escape.